Hey guys, welcome to a new video. Like, comment and subscribe if you enjoy. Without any further interruptions, enjoy the What If. Chapter 17. Defect. Ichigo, garbed in his Jillian mask and already in Bankai, refused to let up against Ulquiorra, Tensa Zangetsu clashing against energy javelins that the Quarta Espada kept generating. His sword was almost constantly raging with the power of a Getsuga Tenshou, which Ichigo suspected was the only reason why he was consistently breaking Ulquiorra's weapons. If it were as simple as melee combat, Ichigo had confidence that he could win eventually. There were three problems, however. First, Ulquiorra was just too damn fast to make more than glancing blows. Hold still, he demanded, slashing and releasing a silent Getsuga. Now why would I do that? The Arrancar asked him tonelessly as he once more abused his Sonido technique to vanish and reappear a distance away, out of range of the Getsuga. I have no wish to die just yet. Ichigo lunged at him, frustrated as he witnessed Ulquiorra's minor wound. He'd managed one on his arm just a minute ago, closed up at a speed comparable to his own regenerative abilities. That was problem number 2. Ulquiorra too had high-speed regeneration and just as insane levels of Reiatsu as Ichigo did, which meant that minor wounds meant nothing and major wounds were only temporary. He'd need to cut off Ulquiorra's head or something equally fatal, and even then the hollowified wizard wasn't sure that Ulquiorra couldn't regenerate from that, if only a limited number of times. As Ichigo flew towards Ulquiorra as quickly as he could, he had to dodge the Arrancar's own attacks. He had a tendency of firing a mixture of teal-colored Seros and energy javelins at the wizard. While Ichigo was certain he could relatively easily withstand a Sero, he'd already gotten cut by the javelin before, and Ulquiorra was extremely good at hiding the spears within a Sero. That ability happened to be problem number 3. The result, an extremely annoying battle, one that worried Ichigo immensely. He had no idea how long his Jillian mask would last, and he tried not to think about it, thanks to his wizard training. If this battle becomes one of endurance, Ulquiorra will win, Ichigo thought grimly as he dodged yet another javelin. Fine then, he wants long range, let's see how he likes me throwing weapons at him. Flipping Zangetsu onto his ring finger and spinning it quickly for a second as he danced around the spears of death, the substitute Shinigami hurled it at his foe. Getsuga Tenshou, he roared with all his might. Foolish. Ulquiorra held onto his newly regenerated weapon and covered it in his own Reiatsu, using it to simply deflect Zangetsu. What can you do without your weapon? Who says I don't have a weapon? Ichigo breathed, right behind Ulquiorra. He'd materialized his inner hollow's Tensa Zangetsu in his left hand, and used his even more enhanced Shunpo to reappear behind the Espada. Without hesitation, he viciously slashed at Ulquiorra's back and wings. Predictably, Ulquiorra managed to turn around in time to block with his javelin, but Ichigo merely smirked behind his mask. Somehow sensing that something was off, Ulquiorra suddenly realized, the other sword. Too late. Ulquiorra had been impaled by Ichigo's black Tensa Zangetsu from behind, the blade still raging with a very powerful Getsuga Tenshou as it pierced his right wing and lung. Ugh, he grunted, realizing he was in a very difficult position. If he tried to move away, the sword in his back would only open the wounds further. Clever. You distracted me with that white sword of yours, while you pulled back on the black chain to return that sword to you, while I was in the way. Ichigo's grin only widened further. Now that I've got you trapped here, it's time to take your fucking head off. The white Tensa Zangetsu thrummed in his hand as Ichigo pumped Reiatsu into it to trigger another powerful Getsuga Tenshou. Sero Oscuro. Ichigo didn't even have time to register what Ulquiorra had said before he found himself being pushed back, his white Tensa Zangetsu battling against Ulquiorra's black Sero. Fuck, Chad was right. He realized as the Sero managed to overwhelm his defenses and completely engulfed him. Thankfully, Ichigo had had just enough time to harden his Reiatsu further, to keep from being too hurt. His mask, however, was relatively weak and began to crumble. By the time the Sero was finished, he had only the top left part of his mask left on him. Further, Ulquiorra had by then disengaged himself from the black Tensa Zangetsu, and was waiting patiently. You were quite strong, Ulquiorra complimented as Ichigo irritably yanked back on the chain again, returning his primary sword to his hand. He waited until the wizard had also ripped the air in front of his face again, regenerating his mask. That's interesting, I was unaware you could repair your mask. That is quite an advantage you have over most hollows. I would imagine so, damn it. Ichigo cursed mentally, knowing he had missed a chance to finish off the Espada. The wound's probably already mostly healed by now. I need time and a calm mind to figure out a plan. I'm Bach. Could this get any worse? Ichigo couldn't help but think. I ask for a calm mind, and I get my insane hollow half. The universe hates me. Oi, what's going on? Before his host could answer, Cazador quickly took stock of the situation. Ah, you're fighting Ulquiorra, I see. That's probably why I came back so quick, so much hollow Reiatsu in the air. I did not want to reveal this, especially where Aizen could find out, but I do not see much choice, Ulquiorra said quietly. You are unexpectedly strong, and I could very well die in this fight if I do not unleash my true form. Pray to whatever you believe in, Kurosaki Ichigo, you will not survive this, the form of true despair. What the hell are you talking about? Resurrección. Segunda etapa. At those words, Ulquiorra changed before Ichigo's very eyes. The coat he'd worn in Resurrección seemed to have vanished under the sheer Reiatsu of this new form. In mere moments, the Espada's changes completed. His hole had widened somewhat, and was now dripping a black liquid down his front, a liquid that Ichigo suspected was some variant of blood. His waist, legs and arms had covered themselves in fur as black as pitch, and both hands and feet had become more bestial, forming claws and talons respectively. A thin, onyx tail had also grown, but Ichigo could hardly see it as he was preoccupied with the long, slightly curved horns that Ulquiorra's mask remnants had morphed into. The Espada's facial markings had elongated as well, but before Ichigo could make any more observations he was hit by Ulquiorra's extremely dense Reiatsu, which had changed somewhat. And just as the Arrancar had foretold, Ichigo felt despair. Shit. Yeah, that's an, oh fuck, moment. I am the only one of the Espada to have reached a second Resurrección form. Not even Aizen has seen it, Ulquiorra boasted, with the tiniest traces of pride detectable in his voice. I don't have a choice. Let's see how long this lasts. You're not the only one hiding their true power, Ulquiorra, Ichigo whispered. Cazador, you ready? That depends. Are you ready to take a level in badass? Ichigo smiled tightly. Then let's see just how badass we can get. Hooking the white Tensa Zangetsu on his pinky so it wouldn't get in the way, Ichigo slowly reached up for his mask with his left hand. What are you talking about, Kurosaki Ichigo? Ulquiorra asked plainly. You already have your mask, and you are in Bankai. How much more power could you possibly have? Enough. Summoning hollow Reiatsu to his fingers, he tore the Jillian mask right off his face, only to reveal his Ijuka's mask. Ulquiorra was taken aback by the sudden and dramatic rise in Ichigo's power, and even more so when Ichigo opened both his and his mask's mouth wide and gave a hollow roar. The wizard struggled to remain in full control of his body. The hollow's instincts, to kill, to consume all souls in the area, were nigh overwhelming. Enough. He clamped down hard, forcibly taking full control of his body. Now that that's taken care of, I have an Espada to dismember. Cazador, as your king the first demand you dampen the lust to feed on other souls. As you wish, king. Though he'd never tell Ichigo, Cazador de la Luna was impressed at how quickly he'd recovered control. By pulling on the Ijuka's mask, Ichigo was subjected to the raw hunger every newborn Ijuka's feels. They must eat other hollows near constantly, in order to keep from degrading back into a Jillian. It is only after the first couple of dozen other Ijukas they eat that most hollows manage to focus on a different picture than always eating, and have a little time between feedings. Cazador had a bit of a buffer on his side when he became an Ijuka's himself. As an Arrancar, he'd kept from using his Resurrección form except when completely needed. As a result, he wasn't using his full power, and needed to eat far less. Ichigo had no such protection, he was at his full power. With his Ijuka's mask, and both Tensa Zangetsu, the wizard was unleashing Reiatsu that rivaled Ulquiorra's Segunda Etapa form. For his liege to master himself and the mind-consuming instinct to eat other souls within seconds, Cazador had to acknowledge that Ichigo's will and determination were quite strong. It's moments like this that remind me just why I'm not pissed I lost to him. He's like a freaking force of nature, Cazador thought to himself. I don't know how long I've got. Ichigo reminded himself grimly. Best make it count. He lunged at Ulquiorra. Both his swords lit up with the destructive light of the Getsuga Tenshou. Both blades were met by a strange weapon of pulsing, glowing yellow-white energy. It took the shape of yet another spear, but Ichigo could tell instantly that this was on a whole new level of power. Of course, the fact that both enhanced Tensa Zangetsu had been stopped cold by this weapon was also noteworthy. This is my Lanza del Relampago, Ulquiorra introduced. I don't know how you have suddenly increased your power yet again, or why your mask has changed. But allow me to instruct you in despair. Cero Oscuro. Ichigo vanished as the attack annihilated the space he'd been in mere milliseconds previous. He reappeared behind Ulquiorra and slashed mightily, only to be blocked once more by Ulquiorra's lance. You must think me a fool to fall for that again. Ichigo raged. Getsuga Tenshou. Ulquiorra found himself being pushed back by an enormous Getsuga that engulfed his vision, only his weapon held back the destructive Moon Fang. It was a few moments before he managed to, with some effort, deflect it upwards. Somehow, his opponent's power rivaled his own now, and he would be hard-pressed to defeat him. Taking advantage of the distance his opponent had inadvertently created, Ulquiorra aimed carefully and threw his lance at Ichigo. It flew at speeds that even Ulquiorra had difficulty following. This was his ultimate attack. The Lanza del Relampago, or Lance of the Lightning, was extraordinarily powerful, and lightning-quick, just like its name. As a result, however, it was extremely difficult to aim. Ichigo barely registered that he was being attacked, but he didn't get a chance to move. The lance, fortunately, did not hit him directly, but it did tear out a gash in his right arm. So fast. Knowing he couldn't afford to have any part of his body weakened, Ichigo sent a rush of hollow Reiatsu to his arm to mend it, noting but ignoring the explosion that he heard occur someplace behind him. Ulquiorra frowned at missing with his most powerful technique. This technique is so difficult to control. He trailed off when he saw Ichigo's arm heal rapidly. I see. So you two have high-speed regeneration, he observed. Yeah, you do too. We appear to be about evenly matched, wouldn't you say? If we continue to fight, we will only wear each other out, Ichigo said, somehow feeling that his Ijuka's mask was still holding strong. He had some time left. I agree with your assessment of the situation. Somehow or other you've gained a great deal of power since the last time we met. I find myself curious, just what are you? I'm human, Ichigo responded quietly. Human, with the powers of Shinigami and Hollow. I see. Ulquiorra turned his back. The wizard blinked, and suddenly Ulquiorra was in his pre-resurrection state, sheathing his sword. I believe you will succeed against Aizen, Kurosaki Ichigo. My encounter with Sato Yasutora has taught me the lengths to which a human will go, and the power they gain from emotions. I would die facing you, I am certain. My segunda etapa form, the form of true despair, had no hold on you. Additionally, I cannot fully control my Lanza del Relampago. You, however, are my equal with that mask of yours, and have mastered your Getsuga Tenshou. Facing you, Kurosaki Ichigo, would only waste both our time, and you will require all the power you have to fight Aizen. He opened a garganta with a wave of his hand. You will see me again. With that, Ulquiorra stepped through his rip in space and closed it behind him. Ichigo blinked behind the mask before dismissing his white Tensa Zangetsu, which dissipated into spirit particles. Well, that was rather anticlimactic. Perhaps, but you gotta admit, for an emotionless guy like him, that was a rather dramatic speech. Cazador gave his input. Fair enough. Ichigo reached up and removed his Ijuka's mask, and promptly fell to his knees in midair, gasping for air as his strength vanished and the remnants of Ulquiorra's segunda etapa Reiatsu gripped him with chilling fear. Okay, note to self, powering down so quickly is a bad idea, Ichigo panted, slowly recovering as the Reiatsu dissipated. Several moments later, he was back on his feet and looking around. He was impressed at the destruction his short fight with Ulquiorra had caused. Several blocks had been utterly annihilated between Ichigo's Getsugas and Ulquiorra's various javelins, and there was a rather large crater where the Lanza del Relampago had exploded. Not for the first time, he was glad that this was merely a replacement town. Where to? Ichigo closed his eyes and reached out with his Reiatsu sense, Not sensing anyone in particular danger at the moment, he decided to check in with Yamamoto. After all, suppose I should reassure them that I'm still here after I went almost completely hollow. Not bothering to dismiss his bankai, Ichigo vanished in flash of shunpo. Meanwhile, Soifun and Neutra were leaping around, trying to hit each other in their dance of death. Soifun was far too fast to hit, but Neutra was keeping her from being able to hit him by forcing her back with his 6 scythes. It was a true test of speed versus power. Neither of them had been distracted for a moment by the enormous quantity of hollow Reiatsu coming from Ichigo's battle with Ulquiorra. They didn't really care about anything at this point but the battle, and the Reiatsu wasn't so strong as to hinder their movements from this distance. On her part, Soifun was getting rather irritated. She did not want to unleash her bankai against such a foe. She was certain that Shikai would be enough. If only she could keep Neutra from moving, that's it. Soifun could have smacked herself. Bakudo. Leaping back out of range, the leader of the Onimitsukido channeled Reiatsu to her fingers. Bakudo 4. Heinawa. Neutra was so surprised by the change in tactics that he was unable to dodge, and all 6 of his arms were suddenly entangled, held at his sides. Shit, I'm defenseless. He broke the Bakudo in a second, but it was too late. Soifun had gathered as much Reiatsu as she could on short notice into Suzumaki and struck out. While Neutra's Resurrection had cleansed his body of all wounds, the Homonka was still on his back, and that's exactly where she struck, successfully piercing the Espada's tough hierro. The Homonka began to glow, and then it spread out, swiftly covering Neutra's entire body. Soifun quickly shunpo'd away from Neutra's retaliatory swipe. It's over. No, I cannot be killed by a mere woman. Neutra screamed as he felt his body breaking down from Suzumbaki's poison. You bitch, I'll come back and I will kill you. Mere moments later, however, he crumbled into dust. TCH. Pathetic. Noting vaguely that Omaeda had also triumphed, Soifun turned on her heel and promptly shunpo'd back to Yamamoto, Omaeda following. On the way, she was surprised to see Kurosaki Ichigo also heading the same direction, and looking completely unharmed. Silently, they began going side by side, looking for tactical advantage against ambush through safety in numbers. I would have thought that you'd be in tatters by now, Kurosaki. Especially since after almost every fight Soul Society's recorded with you, you need medical attention. Predictably, Ichigo turned to glare at her. You faced the Quinta Espada, Neutra, who specialized in brute strength. I faced the Quarta Espada, Ulquiorra, who specialized in speed and regeneration. Even if I was in tatters, you still wouldn't have any room to talk. At least I took down my foe with merely my Shikai, Soifun bit out. Stupid brat, you flaunt that bankai of yours in every damn fight. You've grown too reliant on it. Besides, if there was only one difference in rank, how large could the difference be? Ichigo snorted. How far are you from Yamamoto? He's your Saotaicho, which is only 1 rank from Taicho, isn't it? Or would you prefer a comparison of Fukuteicho to Taicho? Oh, Soifun challenged. Surely you haven't forgotten the day Kuchiki Rukia was to be executed, the vizard growled. I took down 3 Fukuteicho with my bare hands in seconds, but nearly died fighting Byakuya. That shut her up. After a few moments, as they made their next shunpo jump together, Ichigo sighed. Listen, I don't know what you've got against me, but I have several things against you, Kurosaki, Soifun interrupted. I think you're a security risk. I think it's too dangerous to keep you alive with your hollow side, especially as you've confirmed you've become a full-fledged hollow before. I think you're too brash, too arrogant, too young, and too emotional for someone to wield Taicho-level power. You don't respect Soul Society law. You resort to your bankai for every serious fight. You don't respect anyone, and don't hesitate to trample on our pride. I don't like you, Kurosaki Ichigo. But right now you're an asset to Soul Society, and needed to help defeat Aizen. And for that I'll tolerate you. But if Yamamoto Saotaicho ever suggests you need to be eliminated, I will be the first to line up for the job. Ichigo gave a bitter chuckle. Typical. Somehow, that one word got under the Taicho's skin. And just what do you mean by that? The Vizard and Shinigami locked gazes. I'm saying it's typical of Soul Society to destroy that which it doesn't like. The Bount, the Quincy, the Mod Souls, your own Shinigami who, through no fault of their own, acquired hollow powers. That's your default response, isn't it? Don't like it? Kill it. Doesn't matter if you created it or not. In that way you're no better than barbarians. Ichigo turned up his glare as hard as he could, the reiatsu he constantly leaked becoming denser and heavier with killing intent. Behind them, Omaeda was affected and looked at the wizard with fear. I'll tell you the same thing I told Byakuya that day on Tsukyoku Hill. I gained this Bankai to trample on Soul Society's pride, and to do whatever it took to protect my friends. And I warn you, Soifun, Taicho of Squad 2 of the Gote 13. If you ever come after me or my friends, you will need Yamamoto Genryusai himself at your side to save you, because I swear I will come at you with all of my power. With that, he turned on his heel and Shunpo-ed away from them, choosing to go help his friends over reporting to the Saudaicho. He was too angry at the moment to have anything to do with the Gote 13. As soon as Ichigo was gone, Soifun continued on her way to Yamamoto. She easily dismissed Kurisaki's words against Soul Society. TCH. The brat's too young to understand why those decisions were made. The Bound were a threat to Soul Society and lived forever only by consuming the souls of humans. The Quincy were a threat to the spiritual balance because they destroy souls. The Mod souls were a crime against ethics. We shouldn't just take human corpses and force them to fight hollows for us. The Shinigami who illegally obtained hollow powers became hollows. And everyone understands that we have to purify the hollows so they can re-enter the cycle of reincarnation. I swear I will come at you with all of my power. Soifun repressed an involuntary shiver of what could only be fear before shunting it to the back of her mind. None of that will matter if we die today, she told herself firmly, focusing on the coming fights. Renji and Rukia stood back to back, facing off against Haribel's three Frashin, Apache, Mila Rose, and Sun Sun. Apache was of a slight build, very pale with a unicorn-like horn for her mask remnant. Her eyes were two different colors, her right was an icy blue, her left amber. Her hair was a much darker shade of blue, almost indigo, but her Zanpakuto was nowhere to be seen. Mila Rose, however, was almost Apache's exact opposite. Her appearance was very much like the stereotypical Amazonian, dark-skinned, well-endowed, tall, but obviously quite strong. Her mask remnant was also atop her head, but took the shape of a three-sectioned crown going back over her long wavy hair. An additional part of her mask was present as a necklace, while her Zanpakuto was an extremely large broadsword. Where Apache's outfit was moderately conservative, Mila Rose had modified it to take full advantage of her breast's size. Finally, Sun Sun was quite slender, with long straight olive-green hair that ran down to the middle of her back. There were 3 pink dots lined vertically on her right cheek, and her mask fragment took the appearance of 3 hair clips. Her outfit had also been modified, now taking the form of a dress with exceedingly long sleeves that went past the hands, much like the traditional Japanese priestess. Her Zanpakuto had yet to be seen. The 3 of them had appeared almost out of nowhere around Rukia, possibly seeing her as the weakest target. Upon seeing this, Renji had rushed to her aid, managing to save her from a Sero to the back from Sun Sun while Rukia fought Mila Rose. Seeing as the 3 Arankar had already encircled them, the 2 childhood friends immediately took a back-to-back position, releasing their Shikai. Any ideas? The tattooed Fukutecho muttered under his breath, knowing full well that Rukia would hear him. Maybe. Have you mastered the trick of yours? The one you've been working on lately? Yeah, but I don't see how it applies here, Renji replied, confused. Rukia allowed a small smirk that resembled Ichigo's own. I'll provide a few pillars. Think you can handle the rest? No problem. What are you 2 dead Shinigami talking about? Apache demanded. You know, Shinigami are almost always dead to begin with, Mila Rose teased. After all, how else would they end up in Soul Society? Fuck you, Mila Rose. You know goddamn well what I meant. Apache. Sun Sun scolded. You shouldn't give them any opportunities. These 2 are strong and you know it. We might even have to bring out our pet. The high-strung Frashin scoffed. Yeah, right. Renji, I'm going to need you to protect me for a little bit, Rukia asked quietly. What I'm about to do is going to take quite a bit of my reiatsu and concentration. Renji nodded, which the diminutive ice user felt due to their size difference. I've got your back, Rukia. She closed her eyes and began calling up as much Reiatsu as she could. Fuck, she's doing something. Apache noticed and yelled out. We know, so stop her, we're kinda being blocked by her partner. Mila Rose replied back, Sun, go help Apache, I'll keep the redhead occupied. Oh no you don't, howl, Zabumaru. Though his Shikai was already released, Renji couldn't help calling on his Zanpakuto. It was a matter of pride. To all three Fraxians' surprise, the chain sword circled around the two of them dozens of times, forming a small protective sphere of blades, guided by Renji's Reiatsu. All three Arankar began hacking at it, and Renji focused his Reiatsu into Zabumaru. Hold on there, partner. Rukia's almost done. Do not worry about us, Renji. We are fine for the moment, as long as they don't begin blasting Seros at us. Unfortunately, after a few strikes Sun had that exact idea, and after relaying it to her fellow Frasian, the three charged up Seros and fired them at once at the same spot on Zabumaru, making it howl and hiss in pain from its ape and snake heads within Renji's inner world. Renji. About time. Renji called Zabumaru back to its initial Shikai state, freeing them both. Whatever you're going to do it quick. Some no mai, Rukia intoned, but her voice was doubly layered with something that made Zabumaru stiffen in recognition. Tsukishiro. Dozens of ice pillars appeared around them in a circle, forcing all three Frasian to dodge out of the way repeatedly to keep from being frozen solid. Rukia fell to one knee in midair. Go, Renji, she whispered, trying to adjust to the severe Reiatsu depletion. Thank you, Soda no Shirayuki, for your help. Anytime, Rukia, I am glad to help. Renji's eyes widened in awe of what he had just observed. Rukia had truly outdone herself there. Well, I'm not going to waste the opportunity. He shot Zabumaru out towards Apache, who easily dodged. What she didn't see was that Zabumaru had been deflected and redirected by the impact with the ice pillar behind the Arankar. Now it was subtly aiming towards Sun, who instinctually realized the danger and dodged as well. Watch out, Sun warned Mila Rose, who had her back to the oncoming blade. From there it became a fun game, for Renji, of trapping the three of them in a cage of Zabumaru's blades. Finally, it was complete was the Zanpakuto's end blade hooked onto one of the previous segments. The pineapple-haired Shinigami smirked as he prepared to pull it tight and shred the three Frasian. Gotcha. We don't have a choice. Apache cried out, pulling off her bracelets, which revealed themselves to be chakrams in her Zanpakuto. Thrust, Sierva. Devour, Leona, Mila Rose yelled, for once agreeing with Apache. Strangled to death, Anaconda. The energy emitted from the triple resurrection was enough to push Zabumaru's blades far enough apart for them to escape. Frowning at the lost opportunity, he quickly took stock of their new forms. Apache was now completely covered, from neck to toe, in fur. Dangerous-looking antlers topped her otherwise unchanged head. Mila Rose's warrior outfit had dissolved and had been replaced with garments made of hollow bone that barely covered everything. It consisted of an armored thong, thigh-high boots, gloves that reached her elbow, and two claw-looking pieces that supported her breasts while concealing just enough to remain within the bounds of decency. The bone necklace she had worn had expanded into neck protection, while the crown morphed into a headdress that had long golden hair reaching down to the small of her back. Sun now resembled a naga, a mythical creature whose bottom half was an extremely large snake, while from the waist up was a woman. Shit, he muttered. Rukia, you alright? Things just got worse. You don't say. Rukia responded sarcastically, but she nevertheless got up to fight. The pillars are still up. Why can't you just trap them again? I don't mind trying, but I get the feeling that they're too strong to be held by my Shikai any longer, Renji explained. Then why not go Bankai? They're not strong enough to need to go to such extremes. We just need to work together. You bastards. Apache screamed at them. Mila Rose, Sun, let's bring out our pet. Yes, let's, Sun agreed. Mila Rose merely nodded. What happened next stunned Renji and Rukia into silence. All three tore their left arms off and then threw them together a small distance away from them. Chimera Parka. There was a bright light, and the three arms swirled together to form a gigantic being. He resembled a satyr somewhat, as from the waist down he had deer legs ending in hooves, while the torso was that of a highly muscular human. However, the being also had a long snake tail, a deer skull for a mask, and an extremely long mane. He let loose a hollow scream before charging at Renji with a speed that belied his size. Renji, on the other hand, was the Fukutecho of one of the fastest Shinigami in Soul Society, Kuchiki Byakuya, who had trained from a young age with the goddess of flash, Yoruichi herself. He vanished in a flicker of Shunpo and reappeared behind the monster, swinging Zabumaru to take off the being's head. Incredibly, the chimera bent to the side at an angle that would have made the Fukutecho wince in sympathy in any other circumstance, then twisted and punched. Too close and too surprised to dodge, Renji braced himself as best he could, using his Zanpakuto to block. He grunted with effort, putting all his strength into keeping that enormously strong hand from hitting him. Rukia, freeze the damn thing. Tsugi no Mai, Hakuren. Another avalanche of ice erupted from Sota no Shirayuki, engulfing the beast in ice. However, the ice hardly slowed down the monster, which broke free in mere seconds. However, it was long enough for Renji to Shunpo to Rukia's side. Hey, you'll never defeat our pet, alone, like that. Apache taunted. Alone is our ultimate weapon, Sun cut in. With all the strength, speed and ruthlessness of an Espada. He's never been beaten. Though we haven't really tested him out against any Espada, Mila Rose pointed out. We don't exactly wanna kill our mistress, Haribel-sama, and Aizen-sama forbade us from attacking any other Espada. Renji seemed to have garnered the full attention of Alone as they chased each other, Renji often just barely escaping. Rukia, some help here. I'll try, but I'm running low on Reiatsu, Bakudo 9, Geki. To the incredulous astonishment of everyone present, Alone seemed vulnerable to the Bakudo, freezing in place as he glowed a gentle red, the telltale sign of that particular Bakudo. Let's finish this, Zabumaru. Renji's Zanpakuto thrummed in his hand, sharing its master's bloodlust as the Shinigami swung it at the immobile chimera. But suddenly, with no warning at all, Alone broke the binding and rushed at the redhead, easily avoiding Zabumaru's blades. Renji only had time to utter two words, oh fuck. Hado 63. Soren Sukatsui. Rukia's Kido struck Alone right in the head. However, it was only enough to push Alone to the side, just enough for his enormous fist to rip off Renji's left arm instead of punching through his chest. Renji grit his teeth as a wave of pain came over him. I'm gonna have to go see Inoue, but when Alone turned his sights on Rukia, Renji knew he couldn't just leave his childhood best friend behind. No choice, then. He began to glow a fiery red as he gathered his Reiatsu. Let's go, Zabumaru, Bankai. Moments later, the massive bone snake known as Hahio Zabumaru lunged at Alone, successfully snatching him up in its mouth just before he could reach Rukia. Hakatsu Teiho, Renji called out. On cue, the Reiatsu that held the segments of Hahio Zabumaru together expanded exponentially, glowing the same red as a Sero-like blast began to manifest in the head. What none of them could see was that in the back of Alone's head, hidden by the mane, a single eye opened a charged Acero of its own. Hakatsu Teiho met Sero and battled for supremacy. Ultimately, it was when Renji slammed Alone to the ground face first by having Hahio Zabumaru aim straight down that the Sero's power faded and Renji's technique blasted straight through the chimera. The blast continued and destroyed several buildings, and there was no doubt that Alone had been completely disintegrated. They defeated Alone. Mila Rose breathed in horror. Yeah, and you're dead. Suddenly, all three Frashen were hit in the head with a spiritual arrow. Moments later, they began to dissipate into spirit particles as well, having been killed instantly. Both Renji and Rukia looked up to see the grim face of Ishida Ryu. You two should go get healed up. Renji needs his arm back and you're both running low on Reiatsu. Where the hell were you? Renji demanded, angry that the Quincy had just appeared and killed the three Arrancar only after Alone, the primary threat, had been destroyed. Not that it should matter to you, but I was over there keeping the towers safe from various Jillian who had sensed the battles and were coming through, Ishida snapped. Renji, Ishida, Rukia yelled, getting both their attention. Now is not the time for your pointless, testosterone-induced squabbles. There is a war going on. Renji, except that Ishida was helping out in one of our primary objectives. Ishida, Renji just lost his fucking arm. He's got the right to be angry when to all appearances you hadn't done anything. Now Renji, you and I are going to get healed. Ishida, continue to protect the towers. If you two are going to continue like this, I will kick both your asses. Are we all clear? Yes ma'am, both answered dully as Renji dismissed his Bankai. Good, now let's go, Renji. Harabelle clenched her fists as she felt her subordinate's Reiatsu be extinguished. Skilled warriors on the towers. She whispered hoarsely, remembering what Yamamoto had said as she watched the massive bone snake vanish. She turned to go after the ones who had killed her precious Frashin, and vanished with a burst of Sonido. She arrived where the fight had taken place, only to find no one nearby. There was a single human in white clothing atop one of the towers, who was systematically destroying Jillian as they appeared using a spiritual bow. The Espada shook her head. That can't be him. He looks too busy, and he's obviously not a Shinigami whose ability involves a giant snake. The thought struck her to destroy the tower herself, and Harabelle paused for a few moments to consider. She decided against it, however, as she wanted to take personal vengeance on whoever had caused the death of her subordinates, and if she did not pursue immediately, she would not be the one to exact revenge. Harabelle's head whipped to the side as she felt Berrigan's Frashin die, and she sensed that several Shinigami had worked together to defeat them quickly and easily. Noting that they once again returned to the towers to protect them, she shook her head to remind herself of her mission, and began looking for traces of her Frashin's killers. She spotted two Shinigami making their way to a building on the ground, and her blood boiled as she realized that they must be the ones who had killed Apache, Sun and Mila Rose. They're heading to a healing station. She dashed after them, memorizing their appearances so even if they escaped momentarily, she would know them by sight. The smaller of the two jerked suddenly before turning to look straight at her. Following suit, the red-headed one looked the same way, and a grim realization crossed their faces. Harabelle smiled behind her mask and high-collared jacket. That's right, see your end as I come to take your lives. She drew her sword from behind her back. It was much wider, and shorter than most swords, but the truly unique aspect is that it was completely hollow inside. It consisted of nothing more than the edges and hilt. Her sword in hand, Harabelle lunged at the two, only to be blocked by another sword, one very familiar sword. Grimmjow, what do you think you're doing? She demanded. Kurosaki had me beat, was about to kill me, but then offered a way out. He agreed to spare my life if I protect that building and whoever is inside. Something tells me he would count anyone trying to get there, and nothing personal, and I can't die just yet, Grimmjow explained. Traitor, I'll cut you down. She jumped back and channeled her Reiatsu into her sword, making the hollow inside become filled with her yellow Reiatsu. Ola Azul. She brought her sword down in Grimmjow's direction, and the blade-shaped Reiatsu launched itself at the Sexta Espada. Grimmjow grimaced as he realized that if he dodged, the building he was sworn to protect would be damaged, and he couldn't afford that if he wanted to survive past today. He fired a bala at the attack, which successfully decreased its power and deflected it away. While he felt he was on par with the Quarta Espada, Ulquiorra, he knew that until he proved that, Harabelle as Espada Trace would remain out of his league. If I can't win against Ulquiorra, I know I can't win against Harabelle. But I must survive so I can grow stronger. There was only one option, so Grimmjow reluctantly swallowed his pride. Please, Harabelle, can't it wait until the ones you want come back outside? I can guarantee they will, because they wouldn't be able to stand not being able to help their friends. They killed my Frashin. Grimmjow honestly could not see why Harabelle cared for her Frashin so much. His own Frashin had been cowards, the lot of them, giving up on their dreams of Vasto Lord. However, it was as good a reason as any for vengeance, he supposed. So you want revenge? Fine, then, but wouldn't your vengeance be so much sweeter if you crushed them while they were at full power? To make them see that it didn't matter what they did, they had lost the moment they faced off against you. Harabelle stopped in the middle of casting another Ola Azul, hit by the possibility Grimmjow's words offered. They made a kind of poetic sense. They destroyed my Frashins at full power, the least I could do was do the same to them. She sheathed her sword. Very well, Grimmjow Jagerjax. Tell them when they come out that I await them where they killed Apache, Sun and Mila Rose. I don't think you'll get that chance. Harabelle spun on her heel to see someone she had not seen in a long time. There was a woman, garbed in a torn two-piece olive green outfit. She had long, blue-green hair and her mask fragment was the front part of a skull with a pair of curved horns similar to a goat's. There was a crimson line reaching across her face directly underneath her eyes, across the bridge of her nose. Neliel tu Odelschwank, Harabelle breathed. But, how? I was told you were lost. I was, Neliel agreed. I was betrayed, Tia-chan. Neutra and Zael attacked me from behind, and damaged my mask. I lost most of my Reiatsu, and reverted into a child form with amnesia. My faithful Frashin, Dondochaka and Pesci, took care of me. She shook her head. Just earlier today, we came across an Arankar named Cazador de la Luna. Later, we found out that he was the inner hollow of Kurosaki Ichigo, who was very kind, and refused to strike me or my friends down. I came to see him during his battle with Grimjow, but in my child form I was unprepared for the intensity of such a fight, especially when Kurosaki Ichigo had pulled on his hollow mask. The enormous surge of Reiatsu, right next to me, forced open my memory block, and I collapsed from mental strain. I woke up in that building you were trying to attack, thanks to a wonderfully kind human with a gift for healing. Somehow, she had repaired my mask, and with that I regained my old form, with all my old power. I am glad you are recovered, Neliel, and I understand that you owe your recovery to these people. But they killed my Frashin. Tell me you wouldn't do the same if yours were killed. Harabelle shouted. I cannot, the former Espada Trace admitted. But you must put the blame where it truly lies, Tia-chan. Who is responsible for their death? Would the ones you seek have killed them if your Frashin hadn't attacked them first? I don't know. Does it matter? Very much, Neliel insisted. You must understand, Tia-chan, that the Shinigami and humans here are merely defending this town, and their own lives. But Aizen-sama needs this town to create the Oken. And why does he need it? To ascend to the royal realm, and become a god. And there was no other way. Neliel questioned. Of course there was. Aizen looked for the original Oken for a long time in Soul Society. The best he could find were the instructions on how to make a new one, and that only the Saotaicho knows where it is. All he would have had to do is become Saotaicho, and then he could have ascended without causing all this needless violence and death. She shook her head sadly. You know I abhor fighting, even when I know it is necessary. I cannot help but hate Aizen for causing so much pain and death and forcing us to fight. He betrayed Soul Society, his own comrades. He forced several of us to submit through sheer might. He refused to punish the ones who betrayed me, and even promoted them. Is it any wonder that the Shinigami refused to simply lie down and die? No, Tia-chan, the Shinigami are not responsible for your Frashin's death. Aizen is. The two Espada Trace looked at each other in silence, Neliel waiting for Harabelle to say something, the latter struggling to digest her predecessor's words that held the ring of truth. Why then? Harabelle finally asked. Why did you serve Aizen-sama if you knew this? What choice did I have? I desired to live, and Aizen did use the Haugyuku on me, for which I will forever be grateful. And I admit, for a time Aizen did have my loyalty. But I have seen him for who, no, what he is now. Aizen is a monster beyond that of any hollow. Nell, is that you? Both Espada Trace turned to the side, where they saw Kurosaki Ichigo, currently in Bankai, looking at the blue-green-haired former Espada incredulously. Ichigo. Nell promptly tackle-glomped him, sending Ichigo tumbling to the ground. I'm so glad to see you're okay. I was worried when I woke up that I wouldn't have a chance of help you. Ichigo blinked and tried to keep from turning too red. Nell was most definitely a full-grown woman, and if he so chose he could have an excellent view of her breasts. Plus there was the fact that Nell was now straddling him. Now's not the time. Nell, I'm glad to see you too, but could you let me up please? Oh, right. Nell giggled a little, standing up before giving Ichigo a hand up as well. Ichigo, this is Tia Harabelle, Espada Trace. Tia, this is Kurosaki Ichigo. The two glared at each other in suspicion before the wizard tentatively offered a hand to shake. The Espada looked at it for a moment before reluctantly doing the same. They shook hands quickly then let go. Ichigo quickly turned his attention back to his friend. Nell, how did you grow up so fast? Last I saw you were still a kid. That friend of yours, Inoue, has a real talent for healing. Nell explained happily. She fixed my mask, and Viola, I'm back to my old self again. Well, I'm glad you're better. Harabelle was surprised to see honesty in Kurisaki's eyes. What do you plan to do now? I won't lie, we could use your help, but I wouldn't blame you if you didn't want to go near Aizen or his forces ever again. Well, I could go after Neutra, Nell mused. I do owe him a good beating. He's dead, a Shinigami Taicho killed him, Ichigo interjected. Damn, what about Zale? At the wizard's confused look, she elaborated. Tall, pink hair, glasses, pretty creepy. Has a tendency to stalk other people, supposedly so he can study their powers and find ways to nullify them. Quote. Ichigo burst out laughing for a moment. You mean to tell me there's a tall, creepy guy with pink hair and glasses in your ranks? He must be the laughingstock of the Espada. You've got no room to talk, Harabelle put her 2 cents in. Orange hair, really? That shut him up for a moment. Anyway, he's not here. If he's an Espada and still alive, he's probably back in Hueco Mundo getting slaughtered by the team of Taicho the Shinigami sent there. Shame. I would have liked to introduce him to my Resurrection, Nell commented. Oh well, who all is left around here? Well, from what I could see on the way here, the Septima Espada is dead, Grimjow's guarding this place, Neutra's dead, Ulquiorra's retreated and left Aizen's ranks, most of the Frashin are dead. Only ones left so far as I know are the guy on the throne, the bored-looking tall guy and his Frashin, and Harabelle here, Ichigo summarized. Oh, and Aizen, Ichimaru and Tusen who are still trapped by Yamamoto-ji's flames. Harabelle looked at him oddly. You made Ulquiorra retreat, how did you manage that? Ichigo glanced at her, his eyes slightly frigid. I don't want to talk about it. What was left unsaid was I don't want you to know, just in case I have to fight you later. Wait a minute, have you killed even a single Espada yet? Harabelle demanded incredulously. Ichigo thought about it for a minute, rubbing his chin with his hand. Let's see. Yami. Nope, he escaped. Rukia killed that Araniero guy. Ishida's the one who killed Zamari. Grimjow's alive, so is Ulquiorra. Nope, haven't killed even one of you yet. And that doesn't bother you? Harabelle questioned. Not really. Don't really have anything against Ulquiorra. Sure, I think he's a little creepy, but hey, who am I to judge? Grimjow pisses me off. Yeah, you piss me off too, asshole. Came Grimjow's yell from a distance away. But if I don't need to kill him I won't. Yami I would have killed if I had a chance, but that's only because Ulquiorra said he'd defect to our side if we did, as it would show that we had enough power to possibly defeat Aizen. Would have killed Araniero and Zamari too for a number of reasons, but Rukia and Ishida wanted to face them alone. Ichigo shrugged. Doesn't matter though, we just need to defeat Aizen, to protect my town and those who live in it. His eyes softened a little as he gazed at the rest of the foe town, taking in the sheer destruction before hardening again. As for whoever works for him, I don't give a damn. If you all just went back to Hueco Mundo, I wouldn't follow you. Just leave my town and my friends alone. Harabelle was forcibly reminded of Neliel's words from earlier. You must understand, Tia-chan, that the Shinigami and humans here are merely defending this town, and their own lives. She turned her back on the two of them. Fine, I'll help you finish Aizen, and then go back to Hueco Mundo. Yay, Nell cried out happily. You can trust her, Ichigo. She always keeps her word. And I'll help too. Ichigo looked surprised, but then gave Harabelle a look of appreciation. Thank you. Let me just warn the others not to attack you too. With that, he shunpoed away, back to Yamamoto. Wow, I totally did not expect that much help. Now we have 2 high-level Espada on our side. That is indeed fortunate. Ichigo almost did a double take. Zangetsu. Wait, I thought Cazador was back in control. Not that I'm against hearing from you. He shut up before he could dig a deeper hole for himself. The wizard got the oddest impression of his inner hollow shrugging at him instead of taunting him for his conversational stumble, which immediately made Ichigo feel uneasy. I'm not completely back up to full strength, so technically Zangetsu's still in control. For some reason though he feels that we're both going to be needed at some point today. That put Ichigo on edge. Zangetsu had never once been proven wrong in his memory, and had been a source of wisdom and strength for as long as he'd known him. Zangetsu, can you give any details? Merely that in light of your opponent's superior years of experience, you will likely need every advantage you can gain. Therefore I would rather not waste either Cazador's or my own strength in a struggle for dominance. Good idea. The Shinigami schooled his face into one of his classic scowls. More than ever, he was glad he'd made the deal with his inner hollow. So far, it had only helped him. He would ask Cazador to teach him a new hollow power to give him an edge in the coming fights, but Ichigo had been aware of most of Cazador's time in control. The hollow side of the Vizard hadn't used any hollow-specific powers aside from Sonido, Sero and Garganta, all of which were instinctually based. Most likely, Cazador would have nothing new to teach him, and the Sero wasn't as versatile as the Getsuga Tenshou. Almost before he knew it, he had arrived where the Shinigami and hollow sides were beginning to square off. Yamamoto had not taken an opponent, but Ichigo understood why. He's saving his power for Aizen. Ichigo rapidly observed who was pairing off. It would seem that Baragon had risen from his throne and had chosen Hitsugaya Taicho for his opponent, while Stark appeared to be eyeing Kyoraku Taicho. Stark's Frashin, Lilinet, was glaring distrustfully at Yukitaki Taicho. It suddenly hit Ichigo that those three were all that were left of Aizen's supposedly loyal Espada that were here in the fake Karakura. It gave him hope to realize that they now far outnumbered Aizen's forces. However, he had the grim feeling that Stark and Baragon were the most powerful, and most dangerous of the Arrancar they had faced thus far. The substitute Shinigami shook his head to clear his thoughts before approaching Yamamoto. Oi, Yamamoto Jii. 2 more Arrancar have joined our forces. One's Nell, she's the one wearing a green tank top and skirt, and the other one's Harabelle, the one with the coat that covers all the way up past her mouth. How can you be sure they can be trusted? Yamamoto queried, almost tiredly. How is it that this boy can gather loyal followers so easily, without even trying? Well, turns out that Nell was betrayed by Aizen a while back, and only just regained her full abilities. I was kind to her back in Hueco Mundo when I regained control over my hollow, so she got a good impression of me, so she came to help me out, Ichigo explained. As for Harabelle, Nell talked to her for a bit and convinced her that Aizen was evil. She's more against Aizen than with us, if you know what I mean. Yamamoto was quite familiar with the concept. The enemy of my enemy is my friend, he murmured. Very well. Once Aizen is defeated, ensure she returns to Hueco Mundo, and we will not hunt her. Kill her if she doesn't comply. Ichigo's eyes darkened, but said nothing. I'm not under your command, Yamamoto. At best, you are an ally. However, he knew better than to make an enemy when he didn't need to. Fine, I'll go see if the two are willing to fight the remaining 2 Espada so we can get to the traders. Without waiting to be dismissed, he vanished with Shunpo, rejoining Nell and Harabelle who had been following from a distance. Yamamoto breathed out in a long sigh. He could tell that Kurosaki Ichigo was rebellious and held distaste for his orders, but at least he accepted them. What am I going to do about him? He's too strong to force to submit, especially when we need him to help defeat Aizen. And there is no guarantee that even with Shihoin Yoruichi's guidance that he'll want to join the Gote 13. He shook his head imperceptibly. That is a problem for another time, I must focus on Aizen. With that decision made, he returned to carefully observing everything around him, wary that Aizen would break free of his fiery prison or utilize his illusion abilities without the Saotaicho knowing it. Meanwhile, within the prison made up of Ryujin Jaka's flames, Aizen Sosuke, Tusen Konami and Ichimaru Jin waited. Being unable to observe anything outside the flames with their 5 normal senses, they were forced to rely on their Reiatsu senses. Since Tusen was by far the most skilled at it, he relied on it to cover for his blindness. He had been giving occasional reports of what he could detect. The prison itself made it somewhat difficult, however, as it consisted entirely of Reiatsu and thus clouded Tusen's perception. Nevertheless, the blind Shinigami had adjusted and was reporting to his commander. Baragon and Stark are preparing to fight. Harabelle appears to be with a familiar Arrancar of Espada level strength. I believe it is Neliel 2 Odelschwenk, but I cannot be sure. Kurosaki is now with both Neliel and Harabelle, with no rise of Reiatsu to suggest that they are fighting. Grimjow is also nearby. I see, Aizen commented, a small smile on his face. Disappointing, but not a terrible loss. Neither Haribel nor Grimjow are of sufficient strength to pose a threat to us. Their sole purpose is to weaken the Shinigami. What of Yamamoto? He has yet to move from his previous position. It appears he is focusing on containing us. Predictable, but I must admit it is still an effective method of keeping me from unduly influencing the battles with my illusions, Aizen admitted. I will be calling for Wunderweiss soon. Possibly after Stark or Berrigan dies. I wonder how many Berrigan will kill before he is taken down. Jin thought aloud. His ability is truly fearsome. Aizen's smile grew. I predict, none. What? You don't have faith in his abilities? Tucson queried, confused. I do. I merely know that the Gote 13 have more than one person with a possible counter. It is all a matter of when they will realize it. Chapter 18. Reinforcements. Hitsugaya Tushiro and Berrigan faced each other in silence, neither preferring to talk at the moment. They had clashed in silence a few times, with no wounds to either. Each was testing the other's abilities, but it was time to take things up a level. Sit upon the frozen heavens, Hiranmara. Hitsugaya Tushiro called out as he slashed downwards in his opponent's direction. His sword reshaped into its shikai, extending slightly in length and gaining a chain on the hilt not unlike Tensei-Zangetsu's, but smaller. On the end of the chain was a small crescent several inches long. As the Taicho slashed at his foe, a stream of ice shaped as a Chinese dragon lunged out at high speed, attempting to hit Berrigan. Just as it was about to strike, the dragon slowed for no apparent reason, giving the Espada a chance to move out of the way. It's useless, he told the Shinigami Taicho. You will never hit me with an attack of that speed. Hitsugaya narrowed his eyes. He's slowing down the attacks before he can be hit, I know he is. But how? And how do I get around it? An idea struck him. Perhaps if he doesn't see it coming, easier said than done. Berrigan appeared to be the strongest of the Espada, if the way he immediately took charge was any indication. Once again, he flung a dragon-headed serpent of ice and water at the Espada, who once again dodged easily, only to be forced to parry a physical blow from the diminutive Taicho. Berrigan swiftly and easily retaliated with a bone-cracking punch, making Hitsugaya fly back several meters and attempt to recover. What Berrigan did not see was that the attack had spiraled and turned around, attempting to strike him in the back. However, that attack too had slowed down moments before striking, allowing Berrigan to sonito to the side, having felt the frigid air behind him. A paltry attempt, the stout Arankar declared. Weak, slow, pitiful. It's not that my attacks are slow, but that you somehow make them so, he countered coolly. Is it simply a quality of your Reiatsu, that anything that approaches you is slowed? Or is it a special technique of yours? Berrigan shook his head slowly. What you do not understand yet is that all the Espada were not simply chosen for their strength, but also for embodying an aspect of death. Rage, greed, madness, intoxication, destruction, despair, nihilism, sacrifice, loneliness, and my own, old age. Each of these aspects is a cause of death, and Aizen thought it fitting that the Espada be their avatars. As the avatar of old age, the most powerful and inevitable causes of death, I have control over time itself. Nothing can touch me. Hitsugaya's mind went into overdrive as he attempted to think of a way around Berrigan's admittedly impressive and highly lethal ability. In an attempt to stall for time, he commented aloud, "It must be nice to control time. I think if I had that power, I would use it to age myself first. I've been in this childlike body for decades, and it makes me lose the respect I deserve, having earned this position of mine with sweat and blood." The Time Lord laughed lowly, a horrifying sound. An interesting prospect. Perhaps you would like me to do it for you. Before the white-haired Shinigami could answer, Berrigan had Sonito Ed directly in front of him and laid a hand on his left shoulder. Hitsugaya screamed as the bones in his shoulder grew larger, but far more brittle until they shattered from being unable to support their own weight. He vanished in as fast a shunpo as he could. Fuck. Do you see now? Time follows the whims of no one but me. You wished to have an adult body to reflect the power and position you have, but you failed to anticipate that without the necessary nutrients and preparation, your bones would grow steadily weaker as you grow older. Berrigan told his enemy calmly. Ola Azul. Berrigan was caught by surprise, but even so the attack predictably slowed down before it could hit him, giving the espada a chance to dodge. Haribel, what do you think you are doing? What does it look like? Haribel asked calmly. I'm aiding the Shinigami. Her simple statement caused the stocky, scarred espada's face to contort in fury. You betray me. You were never my ruler, Baragan, the female Arrancar retorted. Aizen was, and I no longer serve him. You are not even the Primera Espada, but the Segunda. That does not matter. I rule everything, for nothing can withstand the test of time, Baragan uttered heavily, drawing his weapon, a massive double-sided battle axe as large as he was. Where the two blades met was a slit eye. Despite its obvious weight, he wielded it easily with only his right hand. He lunged at the espada trace. Die a traitor's death, Haribel. Haribel blocked with her own sword, reinforcing it with her own Reiatsu, making the hollow inside once more become filled with the light of her power, similar to when she was using Ola Azul. Even so, her Zanpakuto buckled against Baragan's sheer might. Thankfully for her, Hitsugaya was not content to simply sit and watch. He had dashed at Baragan's exposed back, sword at the ready as he conjured another ice dragon using the water from the atmosphere. He fired it from point-blank range, only for Baragan's time dilation to slow it just enough for him to disengage from Haribel and Sonido away. Luckily, Haribel also managed to evade. Standing side by side with the Shinigami Taicho, the espada trace glanced downward. You manipulate ice. Yeah, what can you do? Hitsugaya shoved his questions about why the Arrancar was helping him into the back of his mind to ask later. He wasn't about to look a gift horse in the mouth. I manipulate water in my resurrection. I think I have an idea. Before Hitsugaya could explain his idea, Baragan approached again. I see I need to teach you both about time. Namely, that it is inevitable to die at the hands of it. He held his Zanpakuto with both hands, holding it downward. Rot, Arrogante. The eye in Baragan's battle axe opened widely and then erupted in dark flames that rushed over to the espada. Hitsugaya watched with wide eyes as the black and translucent fire burned away Baragan's flesh, but the high-level Arrancar made no sound of pain, not even when his eyes melted. In mere moments, he had become nothing more than a skeleton. The hollow mask had reshaped itself into full, highly decorated, extremely bejeweled crown. Then Baragan's clothing, which had still been burning in the fires of his Zanpakuto, put itself out and revealed their new form, a black cloak with a fur collar darker than pitch. The slit-eye pendant from his Zanpakuto hovered before him for a moment before it spontaneously grew an elegant chain on either side, becoming a necklace. The scar over Baragan's right eye also had transitioned over, manifesting as a crack over the right eye socket in the skull. You think you are Shinigami? Baragan asked, though for the life of him Hitsugaya couldn't see how he could speak with no vocal cords. No, it is I who am the true kami. All is equal before my judgment. Careful, Haribel warned, motioning to where Baragan stood. The building he stood on was crumbling and rotting away even as he spoke. Do not get close to him, or you will die. Then it's a good thing we're both elemental users, the ice-wielding Shinigami responded. Bankai. Ice erupted from his Zanpakuto, covering him momentarily before unveiling his Bankai form, complete with ice wings and a tail. Destroy, Tiburon. With a flash, Haribel's coat disappeared, revealing her hollow mask remnant that covered everything from her nose to the nipples on her breasts, just before a cocoon of water erupted around her. Moments later, she cut her way out of it. Now she wore a miniskirt made of bones, underneath which she had a black undergarment. Haribel also sported knee-high boots and elbow-length gloves, and the impressive mask she'd had earlier had changed dramatically, now forming as a thin, spine-like series of tiny bones going from her waist to the underside of her breasts. Her breasts were mostly uncovered, but the nipples were hidden by extensions from a collar that had formed around her neck. However, Hitsugaya's attention was not on her body, but her sword, which had reshaped itself into what appeared to be an enormous, elongated shark tooth, with gill markings on each side. The hand guard itself completely covered her hand, making it nigh impossible for Haribel to accidentally lose her weapon. An interesting, and very useful asset, he mused. Let's go. With a single slash, the Shinigami Taicho unleashed 4 ice dragons at Baragan, who realized that he couldn't use his time dilation to make the ice disappear. But he did use it to slow down the dragons long enough to evade. HMPH. You presume to use water, knowing that I cannot rot something that is as eternal as I, Baragan observed. Fine then, let's see if you can evade this. He opened his mouth. Respira. A black haze oozed from his open mouth and spread quickly. Too fast for me to evade, even with Shunpo. Hitsugaya realized, before he quickly used his wings and tail to form a cocoon of ice around himself, generating more to cover any weak spots. There was only one problem. I can't see the outside, how am I supposed to know when it's safe to come out? And what keeps him from attacking me while I'm in here? Luckily for Hitsugaya, he wasn't alone, and Harabel had managed to escape the Respira. Lagoda, she cried out, generating water from the gills of her weapon and firing a shark-tooth-shaped blade of water at the higher-level Espada. She fired several of them one after another, forcing Baragan to give up his Respira in favor of dodging. Sensing the dark, deadly Reiatsu of the Respira retreat, Hitsugaya came out of his icy shell and observed with a critical eye, to see when he could strike. Enough of this. Out of his cloak, a far more dangerous and wicked-looking battle axe than the one Baragan had originally wielded appeared. It was pitch black and had two pointed blades on either side of the metallic shaft. Grabbing it with his skeletal hand, he easily cleaved right through Harabel's attacks, rushing towards her and releasing his Respira technique again. Guncho Sarara, Hitsugaya cried, sweeping his Zanpakuto horizontally and releasing dozens of ice daggers at Baragan, who once more had to evade. This, coincidentally, put the daggers straight on a flight path to Harabel. Her viendo. The ice melted and flowed around her continuously in a circle. As the water-manipulating Arankar raised her sword, the life-giving liquid she had used in her Lagoda attacks also returned to her. Cascada. All the water that Harabel had accumulated was sent as an ongoing blast of high-pressurized water at her opponent, whose time dilation was insufficient to keep the water from striking him. Instead, he blocked with his new axe. Her attack continued as she pumped Reiatsu into her Zanpakuto to keep the gill markings generating more water, keeping them in a standstill. Now, Shinigami. Ryusenka. Hitsugaya Shunpo ed as fast as he could at the Time Lord, stabbing him in the back with his sword. From the stab wound, ice erupted all around Baragan, quickly encasing him. Thankfully, the cascading water that Harabel was continuing to fire provided plenty of material to freeze the Segunda Espada entirely. As soon as the Espada was completely frozen over, Hitsugaya withdrew his sword and breathed a sigh of relief. However, when he saw the ice become clouded over and misty from the dark breath of Respira, he jumped back and readied his Zanpakuto once again. The ice rapidly melted off the Espada as he continued to laugh. You think to freeze me eternally? Perhaps that would have worked if we fought in a colder climate, but your ice was exposed to warm air. All it took was me aging the effects to break free. Then perhaps I should introduce you to the frost of a glacier, Hitsugaya responded coldly. Harabel, I appreciate your help to this point, but I highly suggest you maintain your distance. I didn't want to do this in Bankai, as I'm not sure I can control it fully yet. He raised his Zanpakuto the sky. Can't control what, you insolent fool? Baragan asked derisively. My Zanpakuto's greatest and most basic power. Tensao Jurin. All the water under the heavens is at my command. Harabel looked up, seeing heavy, black clouds gathering overhead. Such power. How can one so young wield this? Suddenly the clouds opened up, and it began to snow heavily. Snow? The skeletal Arankar asked disbelievingly. This is your greatest power. He didn't bother to utilize his time dilation, but this soon cost him. However, when just one of the snowflakes touched his hand, he saw a very large ice flower blossom. With a rush of realization, he activated his time dilation and attempted to dodge the snow. Hitsugaya looked on coldly. None of the snowflakes touched him as he watched his opponent fruitlessly attempt to evade and only gain more ice flowers for his effort. You should know, Espada, it is impossible to dance between every snowflake of my Hyouten Hayakuso, just as it is impossible to evade all the droplets of rain in a storm. Luckily for Harabel, her continued use of her viendo allowed her to melt the snowflakes before they could touch her, and with some focus she could redirect the water away from herself. She watched in astonishment as Baragan screamed his fury as he was covered in a pillar of ice that just continued to grow as it snowed. The sudden drop in temperature that came with it also prevented him from using his Respira to break free as he had before. When the last of the petals fall, your life will be over, Hitsugaya told Baragan quietly, turning away. Just like that, he defeated one of the most feared hollows ever known. Harabel asked herself. Baragan had been known as the king of Hueco Mundo, commanding armies and conquering everything, before Aizen had appeared with his 2 Shinigami lackeys and turned him into an Arrancar. And now, suddenly a Shinigami Taicho with the appearance of a child had taken him down. Not without injuries or assistance, of course, Harabel noted, viewing Hitsugaya's left shoulder and arm. And admittedly, the two of us were wielding water, one of the few things that Baragan could not rot away with his time powers. So perhaps it was simply a poor matchup for him. Even so, Harabel had to admit that the Shinigami was highly skilled. I hope never to fight him after he has fully matured and mastered his powers. Can I ask your name, Shinigami? It's Hitsugaya Tushiro, Taicho of Squad 10. And yours, Arrancar. Tia Harabel, Espada Trace. Or at least, I was before I defected from Aizen. You are quite powerful, Hitsugaya Taicho. I am glad I don't have to fight you. Hitsugaya turned away. I am glad of that as well. Defeating someone with similar powers to my own would cost me too much Reiatsu and leave me unable to help defeat Aizen. He eyed the prison of fire that held the traitors to Soul Society warily. Soon, this nightmare will be over, he murmured under his breath, unaware that Harabel could hear every word, and then Momo can truly begin to heal. Well, that's unfortunate, Kiraku Shunsui murmured, casually blocking Stark's own half-hearted strike against him. What's that? Stark just as easily blocked Shunsui's counterstrike before lowering his sword in a sign of temporary truce. The Shinigami Taicho gestured towards their surroundings. Look around you, surely you can tell that we're the only ones fighting now. Stark sighed. How troublesome. Are all Bankai as strong as the one that has entrapped Baragan? Shunsui looked over where Stark was indicating. He held no fear that he would be attacked. Neither he nor Stark had been fighting at anything remotely close to their full strength. Stark had sent his Frashin, Lilinet, to fight Yukatake Jushiro. Currently, Shunsui's best friend had somehow deprived the Arrancar of her Zanpakuto, a scimitar of some sort, and was very easily keeping her from it while refusing to fight someone who to all appearances seemed a child. Seeing the pillar of ice that reached to the heavens, he smiled. Bankai is a Shinigami's secret weapon, the pinnacle of a Zanpakuto's power. The stronger the Shinigami, the stronger the Bankai. Then is he stronger than you? The blunt question made Shunsui pause. In 100 years, he might be. He smiled again. Tushiro is a very quick learner. Then yours is stronger. I wish to see it. The lazy Arrancar eyed Shunsui seriously. You are not even using the short sword at your hip. I suppose I have to earn seeing your release. I'm afraid so. It's somewhat troublesome for me to simply release, and if you manage to force me, I'll explain why, the Shinigami offered. Stark sighed. Lilinet, come, he ordered. But Stark, my sword. The child Frashin whined. Forget about it, just come back to me. Lilinet gave the completely unharmed Yukatake Taicho a dirty look before reluctantly returning to Stark's side. Yukatake took the opportunity to shunpo to Shunsui's side, only to be caught off guard as his best friend tossed him the pink haori he typically wore. Wah! I think he's finally ready to fight for real, Shunsui answered with a small smile. Stark looked at the pair of Shinigami seriously. We are different from all the other Espada, he declared softly. When they evolved from Hollow to Arrancar, they chose to seal their powers into their Zanpakuto, their weapons. However, my power is split between myself and Lilinet. Long ago, we were one. And now, to release our full power, we will become one once again. He placed a hand on Lilinet's shoulder, flaring his enormous Reiatsu. Kick about, Los Lobos. Lilinet seemed to melt into Stark's side, becoming reabsorbed by her other half. A swirl of Reiatsu surrounded Stark and kept him from being seen for a few moments, and when it dissipated, the Primera was kneeling on one knee. Part of Lilinet's mask, the part that had covered her left eye, had materialized on his face, which Shunsui had anticipated. The rejoining of their powers would naturally combine their masks to an extent. What Shunsui was surprised about, however, was Stark's new clothes and his weapons. The Primera now donned a gray, fur-lined jacket over a vest, in addition to skin-tight pants with fur from the ankles to the knees. Finally, Stark didn't wield any kind of sword. Instead, in each hand he held a stylized pistol. A long-range fighter. Guess I don't have much choice. You look pretty strong, Shunsui complimented. Shunsui brought his two swords against each other in a cross in front of him. Flower Wind Rage and Flower God Roar, Heavenly Wind Rage and Heavenly Demon Sneer, Kaden Kyokutsu. Whirlwinds twisted around his hands and swords for a mere moment before the Taicho's Zanpakuto revealed its new form. A pair of huge, highly curved Chinese scimitars with long red tassels on the end. Shunsui held them angled upwards and away from his body from his sides, in a clear battle position. Stark looked at his opponent with a critical eye. This is not your Bankai. I went through the trouble of this pain in the ass release, so show me your Bankai already. I have no intention of showing you my Bankai, the Shinigami replied easily. If you want to see it, you'll have to force me to resort to it. Stark's expression changed to one of annoyance before he swung his right pistol up to shoulder level, and in that swift motion fired an extremely large Sero directly at Shunsui, seeming to engulf him. When the Sero's light faded, Shunsui was nowhere near. Stark wasn't fooled for even a moment, and spun around, blocking Shunsui's powerful melee attacks with his guns, reinforcing them with Reiatsu to withstand the assault. Such simple tricks won't decide this battle, Shinigami, Stark told him calmly, seeming to teleport several feet away, almost faster than Shunsui could follow. Vanishing with a high-speed technique to make it seem like I'd annihilated you, then capitalizing on the moment of weakness that would come with my relaxing my guard. You insult me. That one shot would not have killed you, you're too strong for that. Why, thank you. Shunsui accepted the compliment gracefully even as he readied himself for another long-range attack. You're pretty strong yourself, and from the looks of it your speed is incredible. Your gun fires Seros, right? Right. Can it do anything else? No. The Shinigami Taicho smiled thinly. You're a poor liar. Stark gave an identical smile back. So are you. You're holding back, I can tell even now. Surely you don't think that I would be fool enough to think that your release simply increases the size of your swords. What do I have to do to see your Bankai? More than simply fire Seros at me, Shunsui answered. Meeting the mild rebuke with a frown, the Primera Espada once again raised his right pistol, but this time he spoke as he fired. Sero Metroletta. Instead of one Sero, a dozen appeared simultaneously, all of them aimed right at Shunsui, who was taken by surprise. All waves, rise now and become my shield, lightning, strike now and become my blade, Sogyo no Kotowari. Yukatake Jushiro jumped in front of the multiple blasts, his twin Zanpakuto, connected by a thin rope, held at the ready, and suddenly an enormous blast was headed straight at Stark. Stark disappeared with a burst of Sonido, reappearing several meters outside the blast range. How did you fire a Sero? He demanded. You are not Hollow or Arankar. Who knows? Jushiro replied blithely with a knowing smile. Maybe if you do it again, you'll figure it out. Don't, it's a trap. Stark's pistol suddenly ringed out with the voice of Lilinet, surprising both Jushiro and Shunsui. Even if it is, I find myself curious. And with that, Stark fired another Sero at the white-haired Shinigami, only to once again have it coming right back at him instead. Frowning, he Sonido-ed away, much closer this time to his target. Sero Metroletta. This time, however, he was able to see what was truly happening. Dodging the latest reflected energy attack, he approached the chronically sick Shinigami. I see. You are not simply reflecting all my attacks back, but absorbing them into one of your Zanpakuto blades. Then the attack flows along the rope that connects them, and it is fired out of the other blade at a target of your choosing. The process is fast enough to merely appear as though my attacks cannot affect you. Yukatake Jushiro was not a very easily surprised man. He had gone to the Shinigami Academy with his best friend, Kiraku Shunsui, and after witnessing and even helping to cover up so many of the Playboy's exploits, Jushiro had developed a resistance to surprise and now had a tendency to take everything in stride. The fact that his enemy had deduced his Zanpakuto's ability so quickly, so seemingly easily, however, was enough to make the snowy-haired Taicho gape. You figured it out, after only 3 attacks. Yeah, Stark sighed. I'm glad you can't reflect any and all attacks, though. The fact that you have to absorb the attack first implies that you have a limit. I wonder if you can absorb 1,000 shots at once. Stark. The Arrancar froze in the action of raising his gun to test the theory. Neliel, is that you? Indeed, the well-endowed Arrancar was right in front of him. Yep, it's me. What are you doing here? I've come to ask you to leave the living world, and Aizen. Look around. You're the only Arrancar left who is still alive and loyal to Aizen, but the Shinigami have barely even been injured. Neliel pointed out, you did not grow this strong by being suicidal. Leave, and live another day. Stark grimaced. What she said made sense, but being able to work alongside others who did not die simply from being in his presence had been a blessed reprieve from the utter loneliness that he'd lived with for so long. How could he just leave? Hold on. Lilinette's voice rang out. I can still sense the others. Grimjow and Harabel are still alive, at least. Are you telling us they defected? Neliel's strong affirmative shocked both Stark and his Frashin-turned weapon. Why? He asked, his voice catching as he felt anger and betrayal for the first time in recent memory. Grimjow wasn't really loyal to begin with, he only wanted to get stronger to kill Aizen. Harabel lost her Frashin because of Aizen. Please, Stark, Lilinette, leave now before Aizen escapes his fiery prison. Neliel pleaded, you were a wonderful friend to me before my accident, please don't make me lose you because you chose the wrong side. Silence reigned as Stark struggled with a decision. Finally, he sighed, I can't do that, Neliel. Sorry, but I owe Aizen too much. Thanks to him, my time with the Espada fulfilled my greatest wish, companionship. Can you understand, Neliel? Can you understand the unbearable loneliness you suffer when anyone who approaches you dies because you are so terribly strong that your Reiatsu suffocates them, crushes them over time? Lilinette and I split our very soul to lessen our loneliness, but Aizen allowed me to escape that fate. I owe him my loyalty. But he's just using you. Neliel exclaimed, knowing even as she did that the Primera's mind was set. I know. I'm sorry, Neliel, that it had to come to this. He raised his left pistol at her head. Please leave before I am forced to take your life. Please, for my sake if not for your own. Tears trailed down her cheeks as the former Tercera Espada drew her beloved sword on one of her dearest friends. Shinigami, if I fight with you, will you promise not to kill him if at all possible? Just incapacitate him and let me escape with him to Hueco Mundo, I beg you. Shunsui and Jushiro looked at each other. In that single glance, a whole conversation was had, courtesy of their centuries-long friendship. Finally, the laid-back Kiraku shrugged nonchalantly, though inside he was taken aback at just how Shinigami-like the pair of Espada were. The desire of companionship, loyalty over personal wants, sorrow over the possible death of a friend, willingness to work with Shinigami for a greater good. Those aren't hollow traits. Why not? But we might have some trouble with that. Neliel Sonido edged to his side, her throat feeling as though someone were choking her as she gathered her Reiatsu to fight. Then I will fight him with you. Declare, Gamuza. Smoke emanated from her Zanpakuto before quickly engulfing her. Mere moments later, the smoke cleared and Neliel's new form was revealed. Her hips down had reshaped into a light brown horse's body, giving her the appearance of a centaur, complete with a black tail. Her mask remnant had changed little, the horns extending and curving more, framing her face. Neliel's shoulders, elbows and hands had gained a white armor of sorts, and the skin between them was covered in black material. In her right hand, she wielded a double-ended lance. All in all, Shunsui realized that their new ally resembled nothing more than a centaur knight. Please, Neliel, don't do this, Stark pleaded, his face twisted in reluctance and sorrow. If you won't leave Aizen willingly, I have no choice, she whispered quietly. The Primera sighed, regretting once again being so strong. If only I were weak, I don't want to kill you. Please be careful, Neliel, and don't die. Bringing up both guns, he fired twin Cero Metralletas at Shunsui. Both of the target's partners jumped in front of him once more, Jushiro quickly absorbing as much as he could before seeing how Neliel was holding up. To his utter surprise, she had simply opened her mouth and seemed to eat the dozens of Ceros. Sogio no Kodowari got his attention with a mental poke, reminding its wielder that it couldn't hold on to the attack forever. With a silent acknowledgement, he fired it right back at Stark, only to be surprised once more as Neliel appeared to have done the same, sending back the seros she had eaten, and layering her own sero on top of it. Stark had no choice but to get out of the way, surprised for only a moment. I should have known. I forgot you had that Sero Doble ability, your special ability. How could you forget it? It's the only reason we were even close to the same level in our occasional spars, the former Tercera reminded him with a hint of a teasing tone in her voice. Catching it, Stark smiled in fond memory. You surprised me the first time you used it, you know. I never thought someone could absorb someone else's Sero and use it against them, and now I'm fighting two people who can do it. He eyed Shunsui. No chance of you doing that as well. Not so far as I'm aware, but you never know, the Shinigami replied glibly. It was then that the distinct sound of the sky ripping open caught all the fighters' attention. A small blonde boy in an Arrancar outfit stepped out, followed by an enormous gray hollow of some sort, taller than the tallest Manos Grande. Shunsui's eyes widened when he noticed that the beast had Jillian masks for nails on its enormous feet. It was Stark who spoke first, however. Wunderweiss, it seems that Eisen tires of this battle. As if to mark his words, the boy, Wunderweiss, gave what sounded like a bestial cry, and the monstrous hollow let out a mighty blast of wind that blew away the fiery prison that held Eisen, Tucson, and Jin. Wunderweiss then turned towards the ice tower that held Baragan, and screamed louder, creating a sonic shockwave that shattered the ice, releasing the Segunda Espada. Ichigo, who had been watching with Yamamoto and the remaining Shinigami Taicho as he rested to recover his Reiatsu, felt a sudden wave of despair that almost made him think that Ulquiorra was in the area in this Resurrección, Segunda Etapa again. He looked at the knowing smile on Aizen's face, the one that seemed to say, "Come then, let me show you how futile all your efforts are," and Ichigo scowled. "No chance of your entrapping him again," he muttered to Yamamoto. "There is no longer any point. His forces have all but been annihilated, between the deaths and the ones that turned traitor," Yamamoto rumbled. Hitsugaya Taicho, finish the job with the Arrancar that was just freed. Komamura Taicho, I believe you wished to confront the traitor Tucson. Soifun Taicho, hang back and look for an opportunity to end this war. Kurosaki, you are too. He was cut off by the call of a new voice. Ya have no authority over him or us, Yamamoto Saotaicho. Ichigo turned around and smirked before Shunpo-ing next to the newcomer. You made it. I almost thought you weren't coming to the party. Hirako Shinji snorted, gesturing behind him to the other wizard. What, and miss out on all the fun? Ichigo gave an amused sound before turning around to see the reaction of the Shinigami Taicho. Hirako Shinji, Yamamoto breathed, eyes wide for once in his life. Soifun appeared to recognize them, but Hitsugaya looked more bewildered. So you were hiding in the human world after all. The leader of the Vizard ignored the commander of the Shinigami, instead choosing to address the other Shinigami hollow hybrids. It's been a while since we've seen him. Anyone wanna say hello to anyone in the Gote 13? Nope, Hiyori said dismissively. I'm fine, Love put in quietly. Rose nodded in Love's direction. Me too. There is no one in the Gote 13 that I'd like to greet, was the input from the neutral-sounding Hachi. Me neither, Kensai agreed with a bit of a bitter tone. He berry tan, Mashiro yelled happily, making Ichigo palm his face. Of all the things she could have said. Lisa, however, was silent and vanished in a flicker of Shunpo. With a shrug, Shinji turned his attention back to the leader of the Gote 13 and flickered over to him. Have you come to settle your grudge? Yamamoto asked wearily, but sternly. With Aizen, yes, we don't really have anything against you, aside from fighting behind such a stupidly strong barrier that we couldn't get in earlier. Shinji thumbed a finger at a Shinigami who, on cue, appeared in a kneeling position before Yamamoto. If it wasn't for him, we'd still be outside trying to find a weak point. I apologize, Saotaicho. Very well, Hirako Shinji. Can we think of you all as allies? Shinji fixed him with the most serious look Ichigo had ever seen adorn his face. The answer to that is obvious. Waiting a beat to let that message sink in, he finished with, absolutely not. We're not your allies. Ya banished and tried to kill us, remember. We're not on your side. We're against Aizen. That, and allies of Ichigo. With that, he vanished again into Shunpo, returning to his friends. Yamamoto silently seethed with frustration. Kurosaki Ichigo again. How in all the worlds is he gaining so many allies, all powerful enough to pose a threat to Soul Society? Is he trying to build an army? You done talking? Love asked as Shinji reappeared next to them. Nah, but the time for talk is over. Besides, the enemy won't wait any longer. Indeed, Wunderweiss took a deep breath, and began to scream again. In response, as though following orders, Fura opened a gargantuan, toothless mouth, and began to vomit a black substance, which quickly separated upon contact with the ground and then reformed into dozens of Jillian. The people who were guarding the 4 pillars, Ishida, Kira, Matsumoto, and Hisagi, as Rukia, Renji, Yumashika and Akaku were all in various stages of being healed by Inoue in Urahara's shop, all looked on in horror and awe as a veritable Jillian army materialized before them. How are we to fight all those? Similar thoughts were had by the Taicho, but they were grimly determined. However, the Vizard were more than ready. Let's go, Shinji said softly. Every single one of the former Shinigami reached for their face as one, and together they ripped their masks into existence, flaring their Reiatsu as high as they could go. Behind his Jillian mask, even as he leapt into battle with Tensa Zangetsu in hand, Ichigo couldn't help but think, it's gonna be a bitch to go back to school after all this. Too bad this ain't a paying job, or I'd be making a killing. It was only a little worrying when Cazador de la Luna began laughing his ass off inside Ichigo's head. Chapter 19. Curses and Blessings of Instinct. Ichigo grinned dangerously behind his mask as he finished off the last of the Jillian in his area. It felt damn good to let loose on the enormous hollows, and it felt even better to finally not have to hide his hollow powers from the Gote 13. Damn straight, Cazador de la Luna agreed. Too bad there aren't more to demolish. Looking around, Ichigo noticed that he was the first one done. Not surprising, given that not only had he put on his mask, but he was in Bankai. The others weren't far behind, but what caught his attention was that Shinji was facing Aizen, striking down at him, only to be parried by Tusen. Komamura appeared in a flicker of Shunpo and used his left gauntlet to block Tusen's next strike, and while Ichigo could not hear what was said, after a few seconds both Tusen and Komamura left for a more spacious battle zone. It was the next observation, however, that held Ichigo's full attention. Aizen's wide open. There won't be a better chance. His eyes widened before his grin took on a feral quality. Let's finish this. He vanished into Shunpo, launching himself at Aizen's back, only to be stopped mere inches away by a sword backed by a fox-like grin. Heya, Ichigo, Ichimaru Jin greeted. Afraid I can't let ya double-team him. Infuriated that his perfect opportunity to take out the enemy had been stopped by another of the traitors, Ichigo turned his rage upon the oh-so-convenient target. You can't let me. I'd like to see you try to stop me. He lunged forward, the black flames of the Getsuga Tenshou flooding down Tensa Zangetsu in a fashion that eerily reminded Jin of Yamamoto's Ryujin Jaka. Even so, he did not hesitate, shunpoing out of the way, and well away from Aizen, before pointing his sword at the orange-haired Vizard. I'm not stupid enough to face your Bankai without releasing my blade. Shoot to kill, Shinso. Remembering Shinso's ability from his first attempt to break into Soul Society, Ichigo jumped to the side, watching carefully as Jin's sword extended at high speed. With that done, he realized that Jin's side was exposed, and Ichigo flickered over, already swinging. Getsuga Tenshou. To Ichigo's mild surprise, Jin had already managed to shrink Shinso back to its usual length, slightly longer than a dagger, and used it to hold off the attack long enough for him to dodge to one side, allowing the incredibly destructive Moonfang to pass him by harmlessly. Instinct gripping him, Ichigo leapt backwards and swung his sword again, managing to bat away the suddenly extended Shinso again. You know, your sword's power is really annoying, he said deadpan, reaching up and crushing his mask. Masked Bankai was rather overkill against Shikai, and he really did need to conserve his strength for Aizen, not to mention he still didn't have a clue what his time limit was anymore. It's impossible to get within your guard, because your sword just resizes so you can strike from any range. Ah, that's not quite true, Jin said, his foxy grin firmly etched upon his face. As you've seen, Shinso has the ability to extend and retract, but can ya guess its range? A few dozen meters maybe. Up to 100 times its length, Jin answered gleefully. But that's just Shikai. Now that you know that, can you guess how far my Bankai can extend? Who cares? Despite his nonchalant attitude, Ichigo was indeed trying to estimate it. The thought hadn't occurred to him that Jin would have Bankai as well, despite having been a former Taicho. For once, Jin's smile faltered. He took on a disappointed look as he gazed on the wizard. How sad, you won't play with me. Alright, I'll just tell you. My Bankai can extend up to 13 kilometers. Ichigo froze. That's, I know, an enormous length, isn't it? But it's one you can't really understand until you see it. Jin brought his sword up to point it in the general direction of the foe city where no one else was fighting. Bankai, Kamishini no Yari. The next moment, several buildings in the distance had been cut cleanly in half and were collapsing on themselves, with Jin's ridiculously long sword to the side. Ichigo gaped for a moment before instinctively bringing Tensa Zangetsu to the side, stopping Kamishini no Yari's blade in its tracks. He smirked at Jin's face. Why are you so surprised, Jin? A Bankai can always be stopped by another Bankai. Batting the blade away, Ichigo promptly swung his sword in Jin's direction. Getsuga Tenshou. Jin was hit from point-blank range, but when the smoke cleared, the traitor was only mildly wounded. His clothes were singed, and his forehead and knuckles bleeding somewhat, but it appeared he'd deflected most of the attack using his suddenly short sword. However, there was something wrong. Jin's eyes widened as he realized Ichigo was no longer there. He threw himself to the side even as he spun around, but it was too late to fully evade all injury. Tensa Zangetsu cut deeply into his back as Ichigo rushed by him, narrowly missing Jin's spine, but it was enough to be quite painful. You've gotten a lot stronger and more ruthless since we last fought, Jin complimented, trying to buy some time. He'd underestimated the kid, and now he was injured. I remember, after I cut Jidanbo's arm, you came rushing at me with such a threatening attitude, he smiled. What an amusing kid, I thought to myself. I don't remember that, Jin chuckled. Liar, liar, are you trying to provoke me? Because I'm sure you could do better than that. Ichigo shook his head. No, I don't remember your sword, or your heart. When your blade crosses that of another's, you understand a little about them, like the strength of their resolve, whether you're acknowledged or looked down on. He paused for a moment. When I'm actually fighting someone, I'm always fighting for my life, so I don't get the chance to think about it. But afterwards, it comes to me. And what I've found is, the stronger the person, the more of their heart is translated to me. My, how poetic, Jin commented dryly. Shut up, I wasn't finished. I didn't get anything from you. Neither acknowledgement, nor resolve, nothing. You didn't even see me, you were busy with something else. Maybe your upcoming defection, Ichigo theorized. I thought you were amusing, but now I can see that you're rather creepy, Jin said carelessly. He's grown so fast. I think I see why Aizen Taicho is interested in you. Ichigo's sweat dropped. I'm not gay. Jin looked at him oddly, his smile becoming somewhat strained. That's not what I meant. He took on a pensive expression. Then again, I've never known him to be with a woman. Not even his old Fukuteicho, Hinamori, who was so desperate to please. He could have had her in a minute had he chosen. Don't you think that you should have known whether he was gay before you and Tucson ran off with him? I mean, with his hypnosis abilities, and you being off in a dark secluded location for months, who knows what he's done to you? Ichigo pointed out. There was an awkward silence for a few seconds as neither of them moved, before both shuddered in unison. Let's just forget we ever had this conversation and get back to the fight, Jin suggested. Yeah, we meet again, Bug. Hitsugaya did not deign to respond. He was very tired, and had yet to be healed from his previous encounter with Baragan. He did sneak a glance out of the corner of his eye, seeing Harabel once more at his side, still in resurrection. How are we going to kill him for good? I don't think he'll give me the time to trap him again, and even if he did, I'm not sure I have enough Reiatsu left to pull it off. How do you kill something that you can't even touch? Not going to say anything. I'm not surprised. It must have been such a shock to see that your so-called ultimate technique was ultimately worthless against the might of time. Speaking of time, Hitsugaya decided to try to buy some while he tried desperately to think of a plan. Technically, you didn't break out of it yourself. You had to rely on someone else. Seems that you, O avatar of old age, still have limits. He's a skeleton. Even time must bow to the everlasting. Without any muscular padding, the bones themselves should break relatively easily, if they weren't being reinforced by his Reiatsu. But I can't get close without being aged into dust. He glanced at Haribel. Given the strength of his Reiatsu, we would need a colossal amount of power, compressed to a single point. If we can break his skull, or maybe even some of his ribs, that might give us the advantage we need. The only one that came to mind who seemed to suit that particular requirement was Kurosaki Ichigo, whose Bankai was unique in that its immense power was compressed into a simple sword. Hitsugaya shook his head. Melee is suicide against him. Kido is our only hope. Mind if I join you? Hitsugaya spun around, ignoring the pain in his shoulder, only to see a rather large man wearing a very odd, human-style outfit standing beside him in midair. Suddenly recognizing him from the glimpse of the vizard before they had pulled on their masks, Hitsugaya's eyes widened momentarily before realizing he didn't have much choice. I'm afraid I don't know who you are, but at this point we could use all the help we can get. I am Ushoda Hachigan, Kido specialist. Hachi kept his eyes on Baragan as he spoke. It seems to me that you are injured beyond anything normal Kido can heal. It was an effect of his time dilation, Hitsugaya reported. Don't get close, no matter what. His time dilation ages and disintegrates everything around him. What happened to my shoulder and arm was his time dilation before resurrection. I really don't care to know what would happen if you get close now. I don't plan to get close. Go visit your healing station. I will take care of this Arankar. As much as it pained him to admit it, Hitsugaya knew that was the best option. Someone fresh that Baragan hadn't fought had a better chance of surprising him. With a curt nod, he shunpoed away. Inoue was quite tired. She'd spent the past several minutes healing several people. Yumashika and Akaku had left a few minutes ago, and she was working on restoring Renji's arm. And, there, she stopped her Soden Kisshun technique, breaking the godlike event reversal barrier. Renji's arm was restored as though it had never been lost. Renji stood up and flexed it a few times, testing it. He sent an honest, appreciative smile to the human who'd single-handedly fixed an injury that Unohana Taicho herself could not have repaired. Thanks, Inoue. She smiled back. No problem, Abarai-san. Renji opened his mouth to correct her and ask her to call him by his given name, but Hitsugaya's sudden appearance cut him short. Hitsugaya Taicho, what happened? The second Espada, the diminutive Taicho said shortly, clutching his wounded shoulder. Inoue Orihime-san, please heal me as best you can, I must rejoin the fight soon. Aizen is free. Renji's eyes narrowed in anger and frustration. Aizen, he bit out. Before anyone could stop him, he vanished into Shunpo. Damn that hothead, he's as bad as Ichigo. Rukia cursed as she turned to follow him. Kuchiki, I would not normally ask such a thing of you as you do not have Bankai, but the two of us are the only ice users here, Hitsugaya interrupted Rukia. The one I fought, he is susceptible to ice and water. Please, go aid the large man who took over for me until I return. But be cautious, and fight from a distance. Melee is suicide, even to a Taicho. Yes, sir. Rukia flickered into a Shunpo of her own. Lie down, Inoue ordered wearily. She was tired, but she could not afford to rest now, not when everyone needed her. I may not be able to fight physically, but I can at least help where I am needed most. The healing goes faster if you are completely resting. Hitsugaya gave a short nod before lying down, doing his best not to jostle his wounded shoulder and arm any more than he already had. Soden Kisshun. As soon as the healing barrier came over him, Inoue frowned in concentration, determining just what had happened. She'd never seen an injury like this before. Hitsugaya Taicho, your shoulder and arm's bones are longer and more brittle than the other sides. What happened? They were forcibly aged with a time dilation field, the white-haired Taicho said wearily, feeling the injury start to mend. Aged, Inoue murmured. That explains why the bones are so weak and brittle there right now. They collapsed under their own weight. Don't worry, I should be able to fix it, and your arm will be good as new. That intrigued Hitsugaya. The man who replaced me said that my injury was beyond any Kido. How can you fix it? I don't use Kido, the redhead told him. My power is rejection. This shield allows me to reject your injuries, and make it as though they had never happened. I haven't found anything I can't fix given enough time and Reiatsu. And that gave the Taicho of Squad 10 an idea. Komamura Sajin looked stoically at his old friend. They stood, staring at each other. Well, staring was perhaps not an appropriate word, for the blind Tusen Konami could only see by way of his Reiatsu sense. He spared a glance at his left bracer, which had been slightly damaged from taking Tusen's sword strike. I never thought I'd be protecting someone from you, he murmured lowly. But Tusen's keen hearing caught it anyway. I knew. We were always destined to cross blades one day, Sajin, and on that day, one of us would die. That time is now. He raised his sword to begin, only to suddenly have it wrapped in chains, very familiar chains. Forgive me, Komamura Taicho, but may I join you in this fight? Hisagi. Tusen recognized. Hisagi Shuhei, Tusen's ex-Fukuteicho, stood there with his released Zanpakuto, Kazushini. Kazushini took the form of two medium-sized scythes linked by a chain at the hilt of each. The scythes themselves were double-bladed, but the second blade was upside down compared to the second in that instead of reaching down like the first blade, the sharp edge curved upwards. Komamura gave Hisagi a brief, but critical once-over. Hisagi appeared to be doing quite well. He'd probably managed to get some healing and rest between fights. He wasn't at full strength, that was obvious, but close enough to fight well. Very well. Hisagi merely nodded, his mind burning on the tattoo of the number 69 on his cheek. On that day as a child, I was saved by a man who bore this number. Now it is time for me to save my mentor. It's been a long time, Tusen Taicho. I'd like to thank you. The dark-skinned blind man's face hardened somewhat. Are you being sarcastic? No. Thank you for everything you've taught me. I will be using those very techniques I learned from you, to open your eyes and take you back to Soul Society. Hisagi finished strongly, determinedly. Open my eyes. You really think you can do that? HMPH. You haven't changed, Tusen scoffed as he focused Reiatsu to his Zanpakuto. Suzumushi. His blade vibrated strongly, emitting enough sound to force the chains of Hisagi's released Zanpakuto, Kazushini, around it to loosen, allowing its owner to draw it easily. I do believe I taught you that men who do not know fear are not fit for battle, for it is only knowing that fear that grants the wisdom and caution needed to succeed. But there isn't a shred of fear in your words. Not a shred. No matter. Now that Aizen-sama has entered the battle, I will fight at my full power. Let us fight our destined fight, Komamura. You will release your Bankai. Then so shall I, the giant of a Shinigami promised, preparing to unleash his full strength upon his traitorous friend. However, Komamura was startled when the sightless enemy scoffed and shook his head. No, I will not. For what is Bankai, when I have achieved a power so much greater? And with that, he reached up to his face. Komamura recognized the move instantly, having watched several Shinigami do it in tandem mere minutes earlier. Beside him, Hisagi was equally shocked. Tusen, don't tell me you've... Horror erupted anew from within Komamura's chest as Tusen proceeded to complete the move, spawning a swirl of Reiatsu that blocked sight of the traitor for a few seconds. Just how far have you fallen, Tusen? He roared, both in anger and in pain from the realization of just how much his ex-ally had betrayed him. Taicho, Hisagi grunted, standing his ground despite the Reiatsu trying to push him away. Then the smoke cleared, and Tusen was revealed. He had materialized a white, blank mask with only a line reaching vertically down the middle. Astoundingly, a chest plate and shoulder guards had also appeared, bearing the same design as the mask. Komamura's keen intellect that had borne him through to his position as Taicho coldly informed him Tusen must have completely mastered hollowification. A hollow form? Hisagi asked incredulously. Yes, Tusen confirmed matter-of-factly. Why? The Fukuteicho cried out, his voice breaking as he struggled to comprehend why one of the strongest Shinigami would turn his back on everything to become a hollow. Tusen said nothing, but was suddenly in front of his ex-subordinate, swinging down. Luckily, Hisagi managed to block the worst of it with his own Zanpakuto, though he still received a deep cut to his shoulder. Tenkan, Komamura barked as he swung his sword at his friend-turned-foe. A disembodied arm swung down with him, a giant sword bearing down upon Tusen as though to cleave him in half. However, the newly revealed hybrid blocked with merely his unreleased blade. There was no apparent strain either, which made Komamura's eyes widen, even as he was abruptly sent flying back and down by a retaliatory kick that moved too fast for him to see, even with a Taicho's experience. What is this power? The anthropomorphic canine crashed down into a building, then, but Tucson did not pursue. It's strange, he said. You are all quite willing to align yourself with, and even fight alongside, that half-Shinigami boy, hollow form and all. But when I gain the exact same power, it's something I should be ashamed of. Kurosaki Ichigo was never given a choice, and even if he had been at the time, he required all the power he could gain to go against the will of the Gote 13 and save his comrade, Komamura argued. But you, who were so strong, so respected, so liked among all the Gote 13, you chose to become this. How have you become corrupted? Corrupted? Tucson sounded almost amused by the thought. How does flirting with my inner hollow mean that? No, Komamura, you are blinded by what Yamamoto has taught you, that Shinigami and hollow are opposites and never meant to mix. I'm not talking about that, the canine growled. You threw away everything you ever knew for forbidden power. Your friends, your subordinates, people who trusted you, who believed in the justice you preached. That, dear friend, is where your corruption has led you astray. Distracted by the conversation, Tucson was caught completely by surprise when the same chain as earlier wrapped around his neck and picked him up off his feet, slamming him into a nearby roof. A moment later, Hisagi appeared in a flicker of shunpo and gripped Tucson by the throat, holding one of the blades of his released Zanpaikuto at his ex-Taicho's throat. You are being far too lenient, Tucson reprimanded. I know, Hisagi admitted freely. But this is one of the lessons you taught me, not to use excessive force. There was no true malicious intent in catching you with my chain, which I suspect is why you did not do anything about it. But I need to know, Tucson Taicho, you taught me that those who do not fear and respect their weapons did not deserve to see battle. You told me that because I was so afraid of my blade, my Kazushini whose blades look like they reap life itself, I was a true warrior. How can you say such things, and then ignore them? Look at yourself. What drove you to do this? What drives your fear now? It was a close thing, but being in peak condition and recuperated from his previous fight, Hisagi felt more than sensed Tucson stabbing at him from the ground. As it happened, Suzumushi stabbed through one of the links in the chain between Kazushini's two side-like blades. Abandoning his grip on the Shinigami Hollow hybrid's neck, Hisagi leapt back, using Kazushini's chain to snag the Zanpakuto in the link it had stabbed through before tugging. Suzumushi had still penetrated Hisagi's shoulder somewhat, but it was merely an annoying injury instead of a crippling one. Startled once again at the unusual maneuver, Tucson suddenly found himself without his Zanpakuto. This was a highly unusual situation for him, as Suzumushi was the last remnant of the woman he'd loved so long ago. Have I become overconfident since I acquired these powers? Reflecting over what had just happened, the traitor was forced to admit to himself that he needed to get serious. For the last 100 years, Hisagi, my greatest fear has been integrating into the Gote 13 and dying a pointless death. Cry, Suzumushi. As Tucson was not holding the weapon to provide some Reiatsu, Suzumushi was compelled to do what it could with the Reiatsu it had. As a result, it let out a very high-pitched, grating sound at point-blank range. Hisagi dropped his knees, his hands having released their grip on his own Zanpakuto in favor of holding his ears, trying to shut out the incredibly painful, all-encompassing noise. Tucson took the opportunity to calmly retrieve his Zanpakuto, and raised it in preparation to finish his former subordinate. Bankai, Kokuho Tengen Myoo, only to be forced to block a literal giant's sword as Komamura's enormous armored Bankai swung down upon him. I was beginning to wonder when you would step in, Tucson commented calmly. But to fight me with merely a Bankai is foolish. Especially when I already know this one's weakness. And with that comment, he leapt up and slashed at the giant's right arm, noting with satisfaction that an identical wound appeared on Komamura. Power, yes, but your Bankai is based on the idea of a crushing strike, without giving opportunity for counterstrike. A wound to the Bankai appears on you, and a wound to you appears on the Bankai. Simply put, you are linked, and your Bankai has insufficient defense to keep me from striking, and is too large to use evasive techniques effectively. Perhaps so, the Taicho affirmed, but even if you know my power, that doesn't mean you can evade my own attack. As a Taicho, Komamura was extremely good at Zanjutsu, and he used it then, striking at Tucson over and over again as the giant he controlled mimicked his movements and speed to the letter. However, it was the instinctual backhand from defending from one of Tucson's counterattacks that dealt the first damage. The giant's enormous fist managed to completely crush Tucson's left arm. "Don't forget about me," Hisagi's cold voice reminded him, as Kazushini's reaping blade skillfully cut off the newly useless arm. "Can't you see, Tucson Taicho? Even with hollowification, you cannot defeat us together." Behind the hollow mask, Tucson Konami's face contorted with rage and frustration. "I willfully gained this power, I abandoned everything except the pursuit of my dream, but I'm still so weak. I need more time to prepare, it seems that this form is not enough. Let us see what you can do when you've lost all senses except pain." He placed his left palm against the ring on the end of the hilt of his Zanpakuto. Bankai. The ring began to spin rapidly, then as it span it grew incredibly large as Tucson himself, before suddenly splitting into 10 rings, which flew out a very large distance, a few blocks at least, and then darkness filled the space between them. As Komamura and Hisagi prepared for the fight to recommence, they watched Tucson's form disappear as he finished calling out the name of his Bankai. Suzumushi Tsushiki, Enma Korogi. Both Komamura and Hisagi were very familiar with Tucson's Bankai, being his best friend and Fukutecho respectively. They knew, theoretically, that it would deprive them all senses except that of touch. Sight, hearing, taste, smell, even Reiatsu's sense was dampened to the point of non-existence. Tucson himself called the effect ignorance. The only one immune to the effects was anyone touching Tucson's Zanpakuto. But while both Shinigami had knowledge of the effects, only one was prepared for them. Komamura knew he'd be fighting Tucson today, so he'd talked to Kenpachi, the only one he knew who had defeated Tucson's Bankai. Flashback. It's you. What I want? Kenpachi asked boredly, watching his division spar and wishing that even one among them could challenge him. "I wonder how Ichigo's doing." "Zaraki Taicho," Komamura greeted. "I need some assistance with something that only you can help me with." "Oh, what's that? Does it involve a good fight?" Kenpachi began to grin in excitement. "Possibly." Komamura was very well acquainted with his bloodthirsty comrade's tendencies, but luckily it worked in his favor. Besides, a fight with the man would be good training for the both of them. The Taicho of the 11th Division gave the man his full attention. "I'm in. What can I help ya with? I need to know how you fought Tucson, and won, in his Bankai." To sweeten the deal, he then added, "That's the fight I'm offering. You fight me until I can fight him the same way you did. An opponent of captain-level strength, you could not ask for a better fight than that. In return, I'll help you become an even stronger fighter by helping you gain your Shikai. I can't imagine how strong you'll be after that." Komamura was more than slightly disturbed by the eager ferocity in his fellow Taicho's expression. End flashback. In order to duplicate the effect, Komamura had worn a blindfold, stuffed his ears and nose, and enlisted the Research and Development Division to create an armband that could temporarily inhibit Reiatsu's sensing ability. What ensued were perhaps the most brutal, crushing defeats he'd ever received in his life. However, each defeat succeeded in honing the key to victory, instinct, until one day he'd won and managed to put Kenpachi in the hospital, though the fight-happy maniac went down the biggest of grins on his face. Instinct was the key to defeating the sense-depriving Bankai, but it had to be developed. To be able to fight with only the sense of touch to guide you meant being able to interpret the barest of sensations against your skin. The gentle movements of air as someone comes towards you, the nearly non-existent tremor of the ground beneath your feet as your opponent, the coldness of steel as it approaches and touches your skin before it penetrates. To defeat Tucson's Bankai, Komamura needed the instinct to recognize them and react accordingly. Counterattack was the key to victory. During his time with the Squad 11 Taicho, the canine had gained an enormous amount of respect in Kenpachi, despite the man's odd ways of running his division. To be able to fight under such conditions and win decisively was incredibly impressive. The fact that Kenpachi still did not have Shikai simply made the achievement that much more astounding. True to his word, Komamura had aided the man in achieving the state most conducive to conversing with his Zanpakuto. It had required using a stronger version of Kenpachi's Reiatsu sucking eye patch to lower his levels enough to actually do so, but Kenpachi did eventually manage to learn how to talk to his Zanpakuto. While he hadn't managed to get into his own inner world yet by the time they had stopped practicing together, it was a promising start. As it was, Komamura was prepared for fighting Tusen's Bankai. However, there was a variable he hadn't thought of, Hisagi. He knew how to win in one-on-one combat, but with someone else there was no way to know who was attacking. All he could do was hope for the best. However, sorry, Tenkan, you're a bit large for this fight. Komamura dismissed his own Bankai, allowing the armored giant to dissipate and return to his Zanpakuto. Tusen observed his two familiar opponents as they prepared themselves for combat. Unsurprisingly, Hisagi seemed nervous, if his Reiatsu was anything to go by. There truly is little he could do in this situation, Tusen mused. However, he was intrigued by his former colleague, Komamura. The fox-like being had taken on a strangely familiar stance. It seemed a blend of what he typically used, but it held hints of Zaraki. The masked traitor spat in realization. So, you've been learning how to fight me from that brute. Naturally, Komamura couldn't hear, and so didn't respond. Tusen took a deep breath to calm down. No matter. I'm far faster in this form, and you cannot possibly counterattack fast enough to catch me. With that, he began walking towards Komamura. Hisagi was weak, and could be easily disposed of after Komamura was put down. Besides, the darkness that concealed him was more than sufficient to hide how his arm was being restored by his hollow powers. High-speed regeneration is truly a godlike ability. I never would have gained such power if I limited myself to purely Shinigami abilities. Shinji and Aizen continued to face off, neither of them injured. But then, they had only been testing each other's capabilities through speed and swordplay, and Shinji was trying to buy some time. He'd seen Ichigo's attempt to tag team Aizen, and it was a good idea, especially with Shinji's Zanpakuto's power. However, there was no more delaying the true fight, it was time to take it up a notch. Aizen, I hope you realize you're going to die today, Shinji prophesied. Of course I am, he agreed unexpectedly. But then, to be reborn as a kami, one must die in a certain sense of the word. You were right all those years ago that I could have seen your betrayal coming if I'd just come to know you, let you become a friend. But I always kept you at arm's length, Shinji recalled. But that goes both ways, Aizen. You have no idea what my Zanpakuto does, and if you think you're the only one with a Zanpakuto that affects the senses, then you've got another thing comin', Shinji informed him lowly. Why do you think I was always so good at detecting your damned illusions? Aizen merely smirked. And just what does yours do? You'll see. Collapse. Sakanade. Shinji's sword pommel became a large ring about 2 hand spans wide, while the sword itself grew very straight and gained 5 small holes along the length. He began spinning it almost out of habit. An interesting shape, the leader of traders complimented. Yeah, Sakanade's great, but I'm certainly not lending it to you, came the wizard's rebuttal. But it doesn't seem to be giving off any sort of aura of power, Aizen observed with a frown. Did I mishear about your Zanpakuto having sensory affecting abilities? Take another look, Shinji suggested. Oh, by the way, doesn't it smell nice here, for all the fire and destruction around? Aizen's eyes widened, and suddenly, everything was upside down. Too late to escape, Aizen. Welcome to the inverted world, Sakanade's specialty, the blonde Shinigami Hollow hybrid boasted. All your senses have been inverted. Aizen observed his surroundings carefully. An interesting ability, I admit. Everything appears opposite, up and down, and if I'm not mistaken, left and right as well. The upside-down form of Shinji grinned viciously as he stopped spinning his Zanpakuto, ready to wield it as the sword it was. It's time. After all these years, vengeance. Let's finish this, Sakanade. My Sakanade equalizes all opponents in that everyone reacts on instinct in close quarters, Aizen. Every time they see something coming from their left, they'll block to their left, but in this inverted world, the block will go to their right. It's impossible for the brain to interpret all the opposites in time to change your reaction accordingly, and so you fail, every time. With that, he dashed at Aizen, hoping to finish it quickly. Aizen prepared himself, having figured out another secret of Shinji's Zanpakuto. Back and front are reversed too. Did you think I wouldn't figure it out? Your power is simplistic, but it certainly has potential. He span around at the last moment and smiled, slicing at the Shinji coming from behind. However, Aizen was shocked when it went right through. Luckily for him, his own instinct made him leap to the side, keeping him from being stabbed straight through, but he received a deep gash for his efforts. He opened his mouth to question what had happened, but was cut off by the sudden appearance of a familiar giant bone snake, a red orb of explosive power in its mouth. Hakatsu Teiho, Renji roared, bringing his most powerful attack to bear upon the traitorous leader of the Espada. Aizen, thinking he'd learned the trick, did not spin around this time, but faced the blast head-on. However, as soon as he felt the heat and power of the attack upon his back, he realized he'd been had. But it was too late, as he was engulfed in the enormous blast of Hahio Zabumeru's Hakatsu Teiho. Chapter 20. Sorrow of History, Rage of Present. It is said that it is far easier to kill someone than it is to simply capture them. This lesson was being relearned by Kyoraku Shunsui as he worked with his old friend, Yukitake Jushiro, and the ex-Espada Neliel to Oderschwank. Sero Metroletta. Stark barked out, firing hundreds of Seros at once from his two guns, attempting to overwhelm them. Once again, Jushiro and Neliel jumped in front, and mere moments later, all of Stark's attack had been redirected back towards him. However, Stark had gained his position as the Primera Espada for good reason. He'd soundlessly used Sonido to get behind them, attempting to knock out at least one of his opponents. Shunsui had other ideas as he countered the Espada with Kaden Kyokutsu, before slashing his swords across his body in opposite directions. Bushogoma. Stark was taken by surprise when blades of wind erupted from the Shinigami's two blades and merged, forming a sharp spinning circle of Reiatsu-infused wind. Blocking with one of his pistols, he aimed the other and fired a Sero straight through, defusing the attack. "You'll have to do better than that," he called out with narrowed eyes. "Stark, look out!" Lilinette's panicked voice came from one of the pistols. He reflexively Sonido at a distance away, narrowly avoiding being struck in the back of his head from Neliel's lance. Seeing her obvious pain at fighting him, his eyes softened somewhat. Stark understood. He felt the same pain himself, fighting a former comrade and friend of his. But he owed Aizen everything for freeing him from the hell that is loneliness. Despite his feelings on the matter, Stark knew that if this fight continued much longer, he would lose, and he couldn't afford that. He sheathed his pistols and absorbed Lilinette further into his body. "Time to take things up a notch, Stark." Her voice echoed in his. "No, their head." "Yes. Then let's go, Stark," Lilinette spoke softly from within their shared body. With that, the combined being of Stark and Lilinette gathered their power. The three opponents were stunned at seeing hundreds of gray wolves materialize behind Stark. Of course, Shunsui put it best. "Huh, that's new. Neliel, what can you tell us about this?" "I don't know, I've never seen him go this far," the green-haired Arrancar admitted. "We don't like rejoining to this point," Lilinette explained with Stark's mouth, distinguishable using her own voice. "It makes it more painful to separate again. But for the sake of companionship, any pain is worth escaping loneliness," Stark finished, his expression hardening. "I'll ask again. Neliel, please retreat. If you continue to fight, I can't guarantee your life." "You know I can't do that, Stark," the former Espada trace reminded him sadly, but just as determined. "I can't let you help Aizen sacrifice an entire town of innocents just so he can ascend to a greater power. Let me make you the same offer. Please surrender, and come with me back to Hueco Mundo. I'll be your companion, you won't have to be lonely anymore." "You know I can't do that, Nell," the Primera answered in the same tone. "I should have known that would be your answer. You're so kind-hearted, you hate unnecessary death and fighting in general, but you must understand. How could I live with myself if I turned my back on the man who gave me my heart's desire?" He sighed. "It seems there is no other way." Neliel nodded in sorrow. "I know." Shunsui fidgeted a little, uncomfortable at witnessing such a personal moment. He felt as though this wasn't his battle at all, but Neliel's. A quick glance in Yukitake's direction told him that his chronically ill friend felt the same. It was getting harder to think of the two as hollows with Shinigami powers, when they acted so very human. Shunsui couldn't even bring himself to take advantage of the opening their conversation made to strike. He tried to give himself a quick pep talk. I am a Taicho. My sword strikes with the weight and strength of duty. But Kaden Kyokutsu felt so heavy, her blades dulled with reluctance. Even her usual enthusiasm to play her deadly games was diminished. Ah, who am I kidding? I want those two to have a happy ending. Yamaji's gonna have my hide for this, Shunsui muttered under his breath. Mine too, Jushiro agreed. Letting such a powerful Arankar go without really trying to slay it. He'll burn us alive, but it's the right thing to do. Think we can blame it on the Kurosaki kid? He's already recruited a few of Aizen's Espada, Shunsui mused, his eyes glittering with amusement. Shunsui, don't go causing trouble for him when he's done nothing wrong. But the white-haired Shinigami was smiling. A sudden rise in Reiatsu from Stark and Neliel alerted them that it was time to resume the battle. Gripping Kaden Kyokutsu's blades, Shunsui leapt into the fray. What game shall we play, darling? Let's play irony. Kaden Kyokutsu decided. Shunsui chuckled lightly. This is gonna be interesting, with the additional players. That's why I chose it. Having little choice, the normally laid-back Shinigami called out the name of the game that they were all forced to play now. Irony. Familiar with his friend's Shikai, Jushiro immediately called out, White. He promptly began a furious assault on his opponent, who dodged and blocked every attack before leaping back, sending several wolves to attack the Taicho. Trying to end it early, old friend. Perhaps that's wise. Aizen is still waiting. White, Shunsui called out, intercepting one of the gray wolves and striking on an odd white spot. He struck with Kaden Kyokutsu, wounding it. However, much to his surprise, the damage was regenerated nigh instantly. But something about the way it had regenerated bothered him. It's not like hollow high-speed regeneration. Shunsui's eyes widened as he realized what it reminded him of. It's like it's made of flame. The wolves are made of fire or something. He warned. They regenerate if you strike physically. Indeed, our wolves are fragments of our soul, Stark explained. Soul fragments, imbued with Reiatsu, which gives us the ability to direct them all. They have no body, so they cannot be physically hurt. Now that I have explained that, why are you calling out colors? Stark queried with mild interest. My Zanpakuto's power is the ability to force children's games into battle. I don't get a choice in what game is played. Kaden Kyokutsu enforces her rules on everyone within reach of her Reiatsu. If you win, you live. If you lose, you die. Irony is a colors game. You can only harm someone on the color that you call beforehand, and you can only call the one color at a time, Shunsui explained. If you hit someone on a color that you didn't call, then no damage is given. I see. In that case, black, the Primera decided. But against so many of you, I'm glad that my wolves are on my side. Shunsui blinked. He'd almost forgotten about the pack of spirit wolves directly behind Stark. This could get messy. Thanks, Kaden Kyokutsu. Irony may just save our lives. HMPH. I have a reason for choosing every game we play. It's not my fault if you don't grasp it immediately. You should call me out more often. The Taicho sighed to himself with a small smile. Kaden Kyokutsu liked her games, but Shunsui didn't particularly care for having the rules of battle change on the whim of a bored Zanpakuto spirit. He hardened his eyes, steeling his resolve as he faced the horde of wolves. Jushiro struck then, attacking some of the white parts of the light gray wolves. He struck one, only to be surprised by an explosion as it spontaneously combusted, no longer able to regenerate. He escaped from the smoke mostly unscathed, and began repeating the process with the other wolves. Careful, they explode. Got it, Gray, Neliel called, before firing a Sero directly at one of the wolves. It hit, but did only superficial damage before the wolf regenerated. She frowned. Her Sero should have done far more than that if the Shinigami was to be believed. Unless there's more to this irony game than what the Shinigami has revealed, there has to be a way to inflict more damage in this game of his. She didn't notice Stark frown thoughtfully, having observed her attempt. He too felt that Neliel was more than powerful enough to defeat several of his manifested wolves with a Sero, and that it didn't work bothered him. However, it was the childlike mind of Lillinet who gave him the answer. She had always been clever at games, and this was the last piece of the puzzle. The snowy-haired Shinigami, with a white Taicho's Haori, had called the color white, and had struck at a white spot on one of their wolves, obliterating it, while Neliel, who had no gray on her, had done similarly but failed to do much. The color you call out tells where you can strike, but maybe the amount of it you have on you tells how much damage you do. That would make sense, Stark agreed. It's good then that I wear black pants. However, the wolves are apparently not enough. We must join the attack. Agreed. With a moment of focus, Stark generated a sword made of his Reiatsu in his right hand, and lunged at Shunsui. If I can eliminate him, then I can finish off the other without issue, and knock out Neliel. Meanwhile, Jin and Ichigo kept fighting, neither gaining any traction on the other. Ichigo had refused to use his hollow mask for this fight, wanting to save his energy for Aizen, but that decision was being sorely tested at the moment. Tensa Zangetsu held Jin's Bankai on the flat of its blade, having extended faster than the eye could see. While Ichigo was heartened to see Jin's surprised face, he was thinking furiously, trying to come up with a way to counter the insane speed of Jin's Zanpakuto. Kamishini no Yari, Ichigo breathed, trying to buy time. The name of your Bankai reveals it all. The length of your Bankai was never the most frightening aspect of it. It's a spear, a god-killing spear. The reason you told me the length your Bankai could reach was to distract me from its true deadly power, the speed with which it extends. You're a really creepy kid, you know that. Jin repeated his words from mere minutes ago. You're a human teenager, but you're the first to figure out my Bankai. Too bad everyone knows how your Bankai works. The power of Bankai, compressed into that blade in your body, allows ya to move at speeds ya shouldn't be capable of. It's the only reason you were able to block, and only as a fluke. Let's see how ya do with this. Without warning, Kamishini no Yari was back to the length of a dagger, the hilt of which Jin held firmly against his chest. Buto. Incoming. Cazador screamed at him, echoing Ichigo's instincts as his eyes barely caught the extension of Kamishini no Yari. Fast. The Vizard registered, swinging Tensa Zangetsu. To Jin's shock, he had batted away the attack again with one hand. Taking immediate advantage of the opportunity, Ichigo's left hand rose up, index and middle fingers extended in the direction of Jin's head. If anything is faster than that sword, it's lightning. Hado 4. Byakurai. Jin managed to dodge to one side, evading the attack, but what Ichigo caught was that his foe had instinctually retracted his Zanpakuto and that his evasion now had it away from his chest, and pointing to the left side. Flickering into Shunpo, Ichigo appeared to the right side of Jin, slashing with all his might. The traitor barely managed to twist and block with his Kamishini no Yari, but was surprised when he saw a tiny crack appear in his sword. No, he leapt back, bringing his sword back to his chest. Buto. Renjin. Oh shit. Against the onslaught of Jin's repeated Buto attacks that attacked faster than he could see, Ichigo found himself doing a variation of what he'd done against Byakuya's Senbon Sakura Kageyoshi back in Soul Society. Standing still, focusing his speed and Reiatsu to his arm, Ichigo stood still and forced his arm to blur into hundreds of blocks, Kamishini no Yari either being blocked by the blade of Tensa Zangetsu, or being batted to the side where it wouldn't hit him. He suffered a few minor nicks to his legs, but he was mostly unharmed. Finally, Jin's attack was finished and Ichigo took a moment to breathe. Zangetsu, let me just say, damn am I glad you're my Zanpakuto. I'd have been a goner without you. Okay, credit where it's due, that was fucking impressive. Kick his ass, King. Niece, Jin complimented, I've never seen anyone come out of that attack as unscathed as you. That Bankai of yours is really something. Even with my sword on the offensive, it still feels like it'll break at any moment against yours. I don't get it, Ichigo confessed. That last attack aside, you don't really seem to be trying to kill me. Why would I? I'm only keeping you occupied, the fox-faced ex-Taicho confessed easily. Aizen Taicho's interested in fighting you, but he needs to take care of the pests. Ichigo's eyes widened in realization before he narrowed them, anger and determination dominant in his emotions. He raised and pointed Tensa Zangetsu at Jin, his body turned to the side as he looked down, his arm straight at Jin's eyes. Then I can't afford to waste any more time on you. Damn straight you can't, Ichigo. The Vizard was shocked when a familiar bald Shinigami jumped in front of him. Akaku. I've got Jin Tem, Akaku declared. You go take down the ringleader. Do you really think you can take down his Bankai with just your Shikai? Ichigo barked, gesturing towards Akaku's Zanpakuto, Hozukimaru. It was currently in its Shikai form, as a spear with a small but very sharp blade on the end. No, Akaku agreed easily. If there's anything I've learned from being defeated by that Arankar from earlier, it's that when it comes to this battle, his Reiatsu began to build, manifesting in a crimson light around him. The stakes are too high to hold back. It doesn't matter whether anyone's seen this if we're all dead. Bankai. The red light flared, reaching up to the sky with the immense pressure of Akaku's Reiatsu. When the light faded, Akaku wielded 3 ridiculously large blades, all connected by an enormous chain. He held an oversized Chinese monk's spade, and a gigantic guan dao, each having the traditional red horsetail tassel attached to the hilt. Behind his back, apparently floating, was an axe-like blade with a parallel handle hovering behind Akaku's head. It also held a faded red Chinese dragon crest as an emblem. Ryuman Hozukimaru. What a beautiful speech. Yumashika's voice came from behind Jin, making him spin around. How did I not sense him there? The traitor thought in surprise. He's not even a Fukutecho. A beautiful speech, Yumashika repeated, gripping his unreleased Zanpakuto tightly. Ichigo, go. We have this handled. Ichigo needed no further prompting, and promptly shunpo'd away. Jin let him go, seeing as he now had 2 new challengers. How interesting. I didn't know ya had Bankai, he commented. It's not something I advertise, Akaku answered with a manic grin. I don't want to be taken away from Kenpachi's squad. Now let's get to it. He lunged at his opponent with a fierce battle cry. Renji waited at the ready, holding the hilt of Hahio Zabumeru as he watched Aizen plow into the ground from a tackle from the head of his mighty bone snake and a second Hakatsu Teiho. He could not help but take vindictive pleasure in it, after Aizen had damn near killed him in Soul Society during his escape, had almost succeeded in killing Rukia, and had mentally broken Hinamori Momo. The unknown wizard who had been fighting him sidled over and whistled at the damage. Several buildings had been destroyed as Hahio Zabumeru smashed Aizen through them before plunging him into the ground. That's pretty good, he commented. Name's Shinji. Renji, the tattooed man answered absently, calling back his Bankai to coil around him protectively, waiting for the dust to clear. It was too dangerous to dive into a situation you couldn't see, not for an opponent of Aizen's strength. Hope that hurt, you conniving piece of shit, he muttered. He knew that Aizen hadn't died from just that. It'd be too much to hope. So, not that I mind the assist, but why'd you decide to take him on? Shinji inquired. Does it matter? Renji murmured. Let's just say that he's hurt too many of the people I care about for me to be able to leave this to someone else. Ah, Shinji nodded. I can understand that. It's about the same for me. The dust finally cleared, revealing an apparently unharmed Aizen. However, the top of his coat had several holes and tears, and it had been almost completely burned off on the back from Renji's Hakatsu Teiho attacks. After a moment, when it appeared that they weren't chasing after him, Aizen shunpo'd up to them and began clapping in a slow, slightly mocking manner. Very impressive, Abarai Renji, he complimented. Your efforts are futile, of course, but you've grown much stronger in the time I've been away. Damn it, that was our strongest attack, and I caught him off guard. Renji lamented. Do not worry, Hahio Zabumeru reassured him. We did more damage than you think. The bone snake fixed its eyes upon its enemy, letting out a dangerous hiss. I don't see how. Then Renji saw it. The injury Aizen had received earlier, when attacked by Shinji, it was gone. He healed himself while in the dust. Either that or he's using his damned illusions to make it look like we did nothing. You're gonna die today, Aizen. Aizen smiled. So I've been told, but if I do, it will not be by your hand. We'll see about that. Let's go, Hahio Zabumeru. Renji swung his handle at Aizen, directing his Reiatsu through his Bankai, and Hahio Zabumeru lunged at Aizen. Such a straightforward move, the lead traitor sighed. Perhaps I was wrong about your growth. He reached forward to grab the Bankai by the tooth, quite literally, but was surprised when the bone snake suddenly twisted, veering away before it began circling around him, obscuring his vision. Oh, within seconds, he was surrounded by the coiled form of Hahio Zabumeru, sharp-looking extensions from each segment all aimed directly at him. I see. You plan to either stab me from all sides at once, or crush me directly. Inventive use of your Bankai, Renji, I applaud you. You have obviously learned much from facing Kuchiki Byakuya's Bankai. But not enough. Hado 63, Reikoho. The enormous lightning blast annihilated 3 segments of Renji's Bankai, disassembling the remaining segments, making them start to fall to the earth below. I think you're the one who hasn't learned enough from our fight, Aizen. Renji roared. Higa Zeko. The segments stopped in midair, glowing with Reiatsu, before they began flying directly at Aizen as fast as Renji could make them. Aizen finally drew his sword, and almost casually sliced at the first segment that came near. However, when it met no resistance, his eyes widened. It was only then that he saw, out of the corner of his left eye, Shinji grinning and holding up his Zanpakuto. Shit, but it was too late. He'd been impaled through the back by the protrusion on a large segment, and it was sticking out of his stomach. Whoa, Renji blinked. Was that it? Did I seriously just land a critical blow to Aizen? But then, Aizen cut off part of the protrusion, an annoyed look on his face. He then flared his Reiatsu, twisted his sword around so he held it in a reverse grip, and then stabbed under his arm, into the segment of Hahio Zabumaru that had struck him. It shattered in an instant. I underestimated you. That won't happen again, he told the pineapple-haired Shinigami. But right now, you're wide open. It happened in an instant. One moment, Renji was at full health, readying himself for another attack. The next, Aizen was somehow behind him, and Renji's chest was sliced open, blood spurting through the air. He looked down at his torso in disbelief, even as he began to fall. Then he looked to his right, where Shinji was, and saw that the wizard had suffered a similar fate. Shinji, your Zanpakuto's power is merely an optical illusion. Your positions were never changed, it was only my perception of them. Once someone gets used to it, your power is child's play. Is this the extent of our strength, Zabumaru? Renji asked, time slowing to his perception as he fell. We fought well, and landed an injury that will help the others. Now rest. Renji was about to do just that and pass out, but then a stray thought passed through his head. What of everyone else? They may die. I cannot afford to rest. I cannot afford to die. I cannot afford to give up when my friends need me. With the strength of his renewed resolve, Renji caught himself, stopping his fall with the air walk technique. Inoue-san, she'll heal me quick again, and then I can rejoin the fight. But it went against his pride to just run. He stood his ground and coiled Hahio Zabumaru around him, blood running in rivulets down his chest and legs. He glared up with all his power at Aizen's back. Once more, Hahio Zabumaru, he whispered. Let's do this one more time. Let's go. Howl, Hahio Zabumaru, Hakatsu Teiho. The giant bone snake lunged once again at Aizen, who half turned to face the threat. With a single sword swipe, Hahio Zabumaru's head had been cut in half, and the Hakatsu Teiho exploded in a flare of red Reiatsu. When the dust cleared, Aizen stood there, completely unharmed. Hahio Zabumaru. Even Renji's thought seemed like a whisper. No, but it was true. Renji knew it even as his sword reverted to Shikai. Zabumaru would need time to recover, or some healing from a particularly skilled woman he knew. I'll get you recovered in no time. Ignoring the pain of his injuries, he fled to the healing station in Urahara's tent. Aizen, a female voice screeched. Baka Shinji, why the hell did you try to fight him alone? I didn't fight him alone, Hiyori. But don't attack on your own, he's too strong. The blonde glared at Shinji even as he struggled to get to his feet. I know that. Oh, are you worried that she'll die? Aizen taunted. No matter. Regardless of whatever you may do, the ending is the same. Besides, she has nothing to fear. She and all the rest of you died on that night over 100 years ago. Hiyori screamed her fury as she broke Shinji's grip on her leg and lunged at Aizen, drawing her hollow mask at the same time. Chop cleanly, Kubikiri Orochi. Her sword warped, becoming a large cleaver almost as tall as she was, with a serrated saw-like edge. Time to get revenge for what you did to us, Aizen. Komamura barely dared to breathe in the darkness of Tusen's Bankai. In the absence of any stimuli save that of touch, he couldn't afford to be distracted even for a moment. He stood perfectly still, waiting for the moment he knew where his opponent was. And in that moment, a counterstrike. The fur on the left side of his face shifted subtly thanks to a change in the air, and that was enough. He struck. Except there was no resistance. He'd hit nothing but air. Komamura had anticipated this. Tucson had discovered the weakness of his own Bankai at the same time he had. Of course he'd worked to eliminate the problem, that being his own speed. However, speed had a necessary side effect, the displacement of air. In his heightened sense of touch in lieu of his other senses, his training with Kenpachi was paying dividends. Komamura's face shifted to a grim satisfaction as he tracked his old friend, following him from the gentlest feeling of air brushing his fur as Tucson moved out of the way of Komamura's attack. For once in his life, the anthropomorphic canine was glad for his inhuman characteristics. I know where you are. And that simple knowledge made Komamura smile grimly, revealing his fangs. Even so, he didn't attempt to follow the traitor. It was difficult enough to track someone while standing still. Moving around would make him lose track of Tucson. It once again came down to a counterattack, or wearing Tucson down through maintaining his Bankai. Komamura waited, carefully keeping his attention on his only sense remaining. Even so, the complete darkness and lack of any other sensory input practically invited him to think about his situation. It's not Tucson's style to make his opponent wait. He doesn't have as much Reiatsu as many of the other Taicho. He always preferred a clean, quick defeat. Komamura frowned pensively. He's buying time. But for what? A secret weapon? He had not even a moment to consider the idea, as he suddenly felt the cold steel of a Zanpakuto against his fur and skin. Instinct took over, and Komamura twisted out of the way, taking a shallow gash to his abdomen even as he swung Tenkan. He missed, as expected, but he'd also swung his left arm up at where he knew Tucson's neck was, gambling that the traitor would be too preoccupied with his sword to notice. He was gratified to feel it connect, and the stronger vibrations from the ground let Komamura know that his clothesline move had worked, sending Tucson to the floor at his feet. Not one to pass up such an opportunity, Komamura pounced. He immediately had Tucson pinned, his right arm held behind his back. Komamura's massive knees held Tucson's legs down. As Tucson had been wielding Suzumushi in his right hand, the fox-like Taicho took it away, holding it in his left. Instantly, he could see. He smiled, having achieved his goal, but was shocked to see Tucson's left arm having returned. But Hisagi cut it off. Well done, old friend, Tucson murmured. But unfortunately for you, it's over. Resurrection. What? But in his moment of distraction, Suzumushi vibrated wildly in his hand, coming loose and being caught by Tucson's left hand. The Bankai's darkness shrunk nigh instantly, until it concealed only its wielder's body, before violently throwing Komamura away. Shaking his head to clear it from the dizziness of being thrown so suddenly, Komamura looked up with newfound horror at what his best friend had done to himself. He'd become a full hollow, complete with a hollow hole, and gross misshapen form. Komamura had never, not even once, suspected that Tucson could or would go so far. Suzumushi Hyakushiki. Griller Grillo. The blind Shinigami hunched over, his four-clawed hands dangling beneath him from insect-like arms as he attempted to adjust to his new body. So this is what it's like to become one with your Zanpakuto for a hollow, Tucson mused. He counted 4 hands, and 2 legs. 6 limbs in total. I suspected as much, given my Zanpakuto's name. Similarly, he discovered he had short fur on his body, and wings as thin as rice paper. Again, that could be explained by the insect properties of Suzumushi. His head changing shape was also not a complete surprise. Insect heads were very different from human heads. His mask covering every part of his head, but his mouth was interesting, but not overly so. He could feel and hear metallic chains as they clinked, covering a set of twisted horns protruding from his back. A remnant of my Bankai perhaps. The one thing that he did not expect, however, was the feeling that his eyes had grown huge and bulbous, and they were poking outside of his head. It was a unique sensation, even if they were closed. But there was something new. Was it? Could it be light? The prospect of being able to see for the first time in his life was too much to resist, and his eyes flew open. I can see. He turned and spotted his old friend. You're uglier than I thought you would be, Tucson taunted. Komamura was able to regain his senses, and he glared up at the man-turned-beast. You have truly abandoned all traces of being a Shinigami, haven't you? He accused. Tell me, Komamura, do you remember why I became a Shinigami? What my goal was the whole time? Justice. Indeed. Do you remember why that was my goal? Your friend, from before. The one whose Zanpakuto you wielded, and have now perverted. Yes. Tucson cried out. She wanted to help bring justice. She wanted peace and justice in the world. And she was killed by the Gote 13. Did you not think it strange that I, whose greatest friend was killed by the Shinigami, would willfully join them? You always said you had taken up her will, her desire for the ideal of a truly peaceful world. Komamura answered, the ideal of true justice. But what is justice? Goodness, and justice, they are not the same. To live a peaceful life, spreading justice wherever I can, that sounds like a life of goodness, no. But I cannot tolerate that. Where is the justice for the murder of my friend? Living out a peaceful life in the same organization as they who killed her without taking revenge, that would an act of evil. The two of them stood silently for a few moments. Finally, Komamura raised his head once more and looked his opponent straight in the eyes, a new fire of determination within them. It seems I totally misjudged you, and we will never be able to see eye to eye again. But if our core beliefs are so incompatible, then words are meaningless. His grip around Tenkan tightened as he pointed it at Tucson. And if words are meaningless, then there is only one way this can end. Bankai, Kokuho Tengen Myoo. Hiyori leapt back, breathing hard through her mask as she attempted to reel in her rage. Blood dripped down her right arm from a strike she'd taken to the shoulder, and her left leg buckled slightly under weight. She'd received a slash to her thigh, and was losing blood quickly. But not a single one of her attacks had connected. Not one. Her hands clenched angrily around her Zanpakuto. It's like he's just playing with me. Aizen frowned at her. You've grown somewhat stronger. Yes, but I expected more after 100 years. What a waste. What made Hiyori even angrier, was that she knew that Aizen was right. She had had more than a century to grow stronger than she had been as Shinigami under the Gote 13, but Hiyori was not one to train for the sake of training, like Kensai. Nor was she a person with much patience, like Mashiro or Hachigen. She wasn't laid back but serious when the time called for it like Rose and Love, nor was she a woman who strived to better herself like Lisa. She wasn't even calm, collected and incredibly focused like Shinji when he took his personality mask off, and put his hollow mask on. All that Hiyori had on her side was an inexhaustible anger and hatred. She hated the Gote 13 for trying to kill her for something that wasn't her fault. She hated the humans for being so prone to losing hope, succumbing to despair over the smallest of things, because it made them hollow when there wasn't any need for it if they'd just get off their asses and fix their own damn problems. She hated Aizen for inflicting the hollowification on her, and she hated Shinji at that moment because he'd been right to try to hold her back and keep her from fighting. Most of all, Hiyori hated herself for being weak. If I were more patient, or dedicated, or focused, or even a little more serious, she berated herself angrily. If that's all you have, then run away, Aizen advised coolly. You are not strong enough to fight me. Hiyori's eyes flew wide when her mask crumbled, her time limit having been exceeded, before they narrowed. She looked to her lower right, her expression morphing to that of humiliation and emotional pain. Coming to a decision, tears coming unbidden to her eyes, she rushed over to Shinji, picking him up in a smooth motion that ended with him being held over her shoulder, and then rushed to where she could detect Hachigen. She trusted no one but the wizard to treat a wizard. Aizen raised an eyebrow. He hadn't expected her to actually take him up on his offer. Perhaps she's grown a little, he mused to himself. Taking advantage of not being attacked, he glanced around, observing his surroundings and counting the fights. Baragan is fighting Hachigen, Haribel and, is that little Kuchiki Rukia. How bold. Grimjow is over there, guarding their quaint little healing structure. Stark is fighting Yukataki Taicho, Hiraku Taicho and, Konami was correct, that is indeed Neliel. Taking note of it, Aizen nodded to himself and continued looking around. Konami has revealed his Resurrection and is fighting Komamura Taicho and Hisagi Fukuteicho. Ichimaru is fighting, Aizen let out interestedly, it seems that Akaku-kun has finally revealed his Bankai. I wonder if Yumashika-kun will reveal his Shikai's true form. Abarai Fukuteicho, Hiyori and Shinji are heading to be healed. Histugaya Taicho appears to be there as well, but he's regaining strength quickly. Yamamoto Saotaicho is simply waiting. He's preparing for something, I'm sure. Aizen smiled, sensing a new fighter approach. You can come out now, Soifin Taicho. The glare on her face could have melted steel. Sting, Suzumaki. Her Zanpakuto immediately took on the form of the lethally venomous stinger. Aizen. Soifin Taicho, have you gone insane? He asked curiously. You, who followed the rules to the letter, who embodied the philosophy of the Onimitsukido, you would fight me outright like this. Central 46 were fools to make you a teacher at the academy, Soifin spat. No, Soifin. Don't speak ill of the dead. Aizen's eyes practically glittered with amusement. After all, you were fooled as well, as I recall. I was never fooled by you, Aizen. I was always watching you. I knew there was something not quite right, but I could never put my finger on it, just like Hana Taicho could not figure out what was wrong with your so-called corpse, just that there was. It's a good thing you could never put your finger on it, the traitor said. If it were that middle finger of yours that was laid upon me, I'm sure that stinger of yours would have pierced me. And now it's time for Suzumaki to take your life. Suddenly, Soifin blurred into 15 copies, 15 Shunpo clones. Impressive, Aizen commented. The assassin smiled thinly. Thank you for the compliment. We don't hear many in Onimitsukido. She, and all her other clones, leapt at Aizen, stinger extended. Aizen moved to block, swinging Kyoka Suigetsu. Getsuga Tenshou. Only to be distracted as he was attacked from behind by a masked Kurosaki Ichigo, who swung at his neck with as much power as he could muster. Taken completely by surprise at the wizard's sudden appearance right behind him, Aizen was visibly thrown off. Soifin's stinger stabbed at Aizen's heart, but the results were completely cloaked by the Getsuga Tenshou that covered a quarter of the faked Karakura town in its intensity, all of it focused at a single point. When the overwhelming darkness of Ichigo's attack faded, Soifin could not help but stare in shock, having leapt back after stabbing. The sheer power in that attack had almost suffocated her in its proximity, reminding her painfully of Ichigo's previous declaration. I swear I will come at you with all my power. But on top of that, Aizen had come out of the conflict completely unscathed. There was no homonka, hell, she hadn't even managed to pierce him. Worse, his head was still attached quite firmly to his shoulders. She watched with disbelieving eyes as a barrier Kido shattered, having successfully blocked Ichigo's attack in its tracks a mere inch from his neck. A moment later, Aizen Shunpo at a slight distance away, leaving Soifin and Ichigo standing side by side. The back of the neck is a blind spot for everyone. Did you really think that I would leave it unprotected when confronting a military organization out for my life? Aizen asked with a slightly smug tone, completely ignoring Soifin. Ichigo tightened his grip on Tensa Zangetsu. It's not over yet. Oh no, Aizen agreed, it's barely begun. How did you block me? Soifin demanded. Aizen turned his head slightly to the side to address her while keeping both eyes firmly on the wizard before him. When two Shinigami fight, it's a battle of the strength of their Reiatsu. It's like with Kenpachi, Ichigo explained, his dually layered voice sending unpleasant chills down Soifin's spine. Kenpachi naturally emits so much Reiatsu from his skin that it works the same way as an Arrancar's Hierro. You need to strike with more Reiatsu than he's protecting with to do any damage. It's one of the reasons he's always after me for a rematch. I'm one of the few people who can push him to take off his eye patch and still manage. Aizen must be the same way, your strike must not have had enough Reiatsu to even push through his skin. Exactly, the traitor agreed. So unless you've got another ace up your sleeve, Soifin Taicho, I suggest you give us some space. He smiled. After all, you'd hardly want to get in the way. Soifin's fists clenched. I am not useless, she growled. Are you or aren't you a Shinigami Taicho? Ichigo snarled. If you can't even lay a hand on him in Shikai, take it to the next level. The Taicho glared at him, though she could hardly keep from cringing at the sight of the masked Ichigo, looking and feeling more hollow-like than she'd have dreamed a Shinigami could be. Ichigo's left eye, a hollow amber within inky black depths, was firmly focused on her, demanding she bring out her ultimate weapon, her ultimate shame. But to destroy an enemy of Soul Society, Soifin could bear any shame. Fine, Keep him busy for a few minutes. My Bankai is a long-distance type and it needs some preparation time, she murmured under her breath. I'll see what I can do. Without a word, Soifun vanished, leaving the two archenemies facing each other. How are you, Kurosaki Ichigo? Aizen asked almost cordially, as if they weren't about to fight for their lives. I imagine it's been a very trying few days for you. Turned into an errand car and back to Vizard, chafing under Yamamoto. He's stalling. For what? But Ichigo didn't dare remove his mask. Aizen was too strong to power down for even a minute. Even so, Ichigo needed to stall Aizen for Soifun's Bankai, whatever it was. I'm fine. Managed to get some rest while my inner hollow was in control. Yamamoto can be very frustrating, though. I'm sure you must know what I'm talking about. Oh, I know very well, the treasonous Taicho agreed with what sounded like real sympathies. Making orders you don't really agree with but have to follow because he's liable to try to kill you otherwise. Let me guess, he's ordered you to kill any errand car that you've managed to get on your side if they don't immediately go back to Hueco Mundo after I die, assuming you all manage to kill me, he added almost as an afterthought. Ichigo shook his head. He couldn't believe he was actually having a decent conversation with the man. Yeah, I mean, they may be hollows, but they're powerful allies, and most of them are no worse than some of the Shinigami the Gote 13 employs. It's hard for anyone to top Kenpachi in bloodthirstiness, and they let him become a Taicho. Aizen's smile broadened minutely. Quite true. Then again, I suppose the two of us, as superior beings, are more capable of understanding. Ichigo frowned behind the mask. What do you mean, superior beings? Well, look at yourself for instance. You're no longer just a Shinigami, or just a hollow. You can't even be defined as just a Vizard or an Errankar anymore, the master of the Espada commented, gesturing lightly at him. You've evolved as both a Shinigami and as a hollow in such a short span of time. That, I suspect, is due to your human nature. Kurosaki Ichigo, you alone among all the Shinigami, Vizard, Errankar and hollow here, remain a living, breathing human being. Your being outside your body is irrelevant. What is relevant, however, is that humans have an incredible capacity for growth and evolution. Just look at the Quincy, for instance. Being attacked and killed by hollows, triggering high levels of spiritual awareness, and then a method of attack. Within a few generations, being strong enough to wage a serious war against the Shinigami, which had been around for centuries. Your other friends are another example. Evolving from having no spiritual awareness at all, to where they are now is truly remarkable. You see, Kurosaki Ichigo, I believe that your being human has allowed you to evolve further, faster than any Shinigami ever could. And that is the reason that transferring Shinigami powers to a human being is as forbidden as gaining hollow powers, Aizen finished. Ichigo had to admit that what Aizen said made a degree of sense. You must admit, though, that a lot of my growth is because I had Urahara and Yoruichi. I wouldn't have Bankai or Shunpo if not for them. Perhaps, Aizen allowed with a small secretive smile. But perhaps more of it is due directly to my interference. Like what? Aside from my determination not to let you kill any of my friends, I mean. The traitor laughed outright. Surely you don't think that was the extent of my involvement. You are a unique creature, Kurosaki Ichigo. Human, Shinigami, and hollow at once. Allied with the grandson of the man who tried to bridge the Quincy and Shinigami, and two spiritually gifted humans with powers unlike anything the Gote 13 has ever recorded. I could not help but see how far you all could evolve. I was too curious to just destroy the experiment. No, instead I attempted to further your growth by pitting you against foes that would force you to become stronger. Horror blossomed in Ichigo's mind. No, he couldn't. You can't mean. Oh yes, Aizen affirmed. Who do you think sent the Grand Fisher to that same place where your mother was killed to fight you? That fight served its purpose, to force you to acknowledge your need for strength. And do you really think that Abarai Renji and Kuchiki Byakuya would be sent to retrieve their love interest and little sister respectively? No, Yamamoto would usually never be that cruel. I was the one who arranged for them to receive the orders, knowing that you would attack to protect Kuchiki Rukia. And it was then that you found out that there was more to being a Shinigami than simply slaying hollows. You learned about Shikai. I can see how you would predict that Urahara would come to my rescue, and maybe even foresee his method of restoring my powers, but there's no way you could have predicted where I would end up in Soul Society when I inevitably came to rescue her. How could you possibly have been able to arrange for me to fight Akaku, Renji and Kenpachi? Ichigo argued. It could just as easily have been anyone else. True, Aizen agreed, but it didn't matter too much where you landed. I knew that Urahara would have trained you to the point of being able to defeat most Fukutecho. By the time you arrived you would be facing cannon fodder until you fought a Fukutecho or someone else comparably strong, because the Taicho would naturally be given orders not to engage unless necessary. Their powers are too strong, they'd damage the Seraiti. Kenpachi would be the only one who would willfully disregard those orders, it was only natural you'd fight him eventually. But how would you have known that I'd win against him? It was a very near thing, and I only won because my Zanpakuto lent me his power and restored himself at the last second. Even if you didn't win, I knew that Yoruichi would be among your team. After all, Urahara Kazuki would never let someone as fresh and naive as you were go without an escort. Otherwise it was just asking for someone to kill you all. Also, by that time you'd encountered a friendly member of the 4th Division, who was traveling with you. Win or lose against Kenpachi, I knew you would be healed and that much stronger for it. And if you did somehow die, then it meant the end of the experiment of how far you could evolve. Ichigo was grasping for straws now. But you couldn't have predicted how my Bankai would turn out. If you arranged for me to fight Byakuya again at Tsukyuku Hill, then a Bankai can be countered by most any other Bankai. Jin's Bankai, as you have encountered, could be blocked by yours through comparison of speed. Alternatively, Hitsugaya-kun's Bankai could have countered Jin's by freezing the metal, rendering it far more brittle and incapable of the piercing power. Or Jin could have countered Hitsugaya-kun's Bankai by punching through his ice wings and killing him in one hit. No matter what Bankai you had an opportunity to counter Kuchiki Byakuya. Given your abnormally high Reiatsu, and your inner hollow, I found it increasingly unlikely that you would die. Aizen's smile grew, especially since you had someone to protect, and the resolve to ensure that no one died because you weren't strong enough like that day your mother died. Ichigo felt like he'd been punched in the gut. What do you know about my mother? He finished with a snarl, hackles raised and bloodlust rising at the forbidden topic. How do you know so much about me? Aizen shook his head. I've known about you since the day you were born. The unique circumstances of your birth prompted me to watch you. And when you started to grow weak, I acted. The shock caused Ichigo to lose his grip on hollowification, and his mask shattered. Ichigo's heartbeat was slowly overwhelming his own hearing even as he felt his body grow more and more numb. As if from far away, he heard himself ask incredulously, "You've known about me since I was born?" A memory flashed, and Ichigo's heartbeat ceased. He couldn't breathe, he was drowning. Suddenly he was back on that fateful day. Back on the day that everything changed. Back on the day that he changed. Back on the day that set him firmly on the path that defined not what, but who he was. The rain of memory engulfed him. Zangetsu and Cazador de la Luna both looked up in Ichigo's inner world as the sky darkened with thunderclouds before promptly letting loose a drenching, freezing rain. Well, shit. Oi, Zangetsu, what's going on? The spirit form of the mighty Zanpakuto bowed his head. An old wound that has never been healed, that I fear never may truly mend, has been reopened. Watch carefully, Cazador de la Luna, and witness your true origins. The unending rain provided a curtain upon the many sideways skyscrapers that littered the mindscape. With it raining so hard he could hardly see a dozen feet in front of him, coupled with cacophony of raindrops hitting the buildings around him, the Arrancar couldn't see how he would be able to witness anything before a surprisingly clear shout startled him. Hey! What the? Cazador spun around in shock, hand already on his blade's hilt before he got a grip. The rain lightened just enough for him to see a solitary skyscraper a scant 20 feet away. Taking advantage of being able to see, Cazador saw a kid in a yellow raincoat on one of the skyscrapers, rushing towards a girl on the edge who appeared ready to jump. I wonder who that is. Peering closely, Cazador watched as the constant rain seemed to paint a picture, an illusion of a river just beyond the girl, and wet grass and mud underneath the boots of the child who was running towards her. It was only after the inner hollow had seen a flash of the orange hair that he realized it was Ichigo who was running. Of course, he wanted to save the girl. Then Cazador saw a tall, beautiful woman under an umbrella rushing after Ichigo, and heard her vaguely calling out. "Mom," he breathed. It was his first time he'd had a chance to really see her alive. While Cazador shared many of Ichigo's memories, they were mostly after he'd awakened for the first time as Ichigo regained his Shinigami powers. Just then, lightning struck, and in the brief flash of light, Cazador saw that the girl had been replaced by a strangely familiar hollow. When the flash faded, he saw that Ichigo was just waking up, apparently having been knocked unconscious. Atop the young boy was the bloodied corpse of his mother. Ichigo's feelings of shock and the swift rise of horror and denial were so strong that even merely watching, Cazador suddenly found it hard to breathe as he relived his partner's memory. It was then that Cazador recognized the next feeling. It was the emotional sensation of having one's heart ripped out forcefully, the psychic torment of unbearable guilt. The utter bleakness of despair from which a soul transforms into a hollow. Realizations ripped through the Aaronkar faster than he thought he could process them. Before he could put voice to them, however, Zangetsu beat him to the punch, his voice low but still clearly audible from beside Cazador de la Luna. "Yes, that moment is where you were born." The manifestation of Ichigo's Zanpakuto shook his head. That tragedy planted the seeds of hollow power within him, and is also the cause of Ichigo's history of fighting. He refused to be weak enough to let the same thing happen to the rest of his family, but even so guilt plagued him for many years, thinking that somehow he had killed his mother, until he came face to face with the hollow that killed her. "And," Cazador asked eagerly, "despite our best efforts, the hollow known as Grand Fisher escaped?" Something in Zangetsu's tone made Cazador bite back the immediate disparaging remark about Ichigo's fighting skills. "There's something you're not telling me." Zangetsu turned to face his hollow wielder and looked him dead in the eye. The Grand Fisher is known for having killed and evaded several skilled Shinigami for over 50 years. Ichigo, with almost no experience, no control over his Reiatsu, and very minimal skills with the blade, nearly slew him out of sheer might, determination, and lust for vengeance. The implications were not lost on Cazador. Wait, if he was able to do that before gaining Shikai, what will he be like with Bankai? And with me? Zangetsu was silent now, looking up at the dark clouds as he waited to be used. He noted with ill-concealed worry about the still-growing cumulonimbus that was forming from Ichigo's stormy state of mind. Lightning flashed within the storm cloud again before shooting out across the heavens, illuminating a disturbingly human expression of worry on Cazador de la Luna. While Zangetsu could still contact his wielder, what could he possibly say? Ichigo's mother died because of Aizen, and now the traitor stood before Ichigo, challenging his power. If the wizard had ever needed motivation to kill with prejudice instead of simply defeat, that was it. All Zangetsu could do was offer his support in slaying Ichigo's enemies, and hope the reign would end soon. Meanwhile, outside of his inner world, the Shinigami substitute breathed very shallowly, his eyes wide in renewed emotional pain as he pulled himself away from the unforgettable memory that defined his life from such a young age. You set the Grand Fisher on my mother that day." The pain in his heart slowly changed into something more useful. "Because I was soft, and weak, and completely reliant on her." It was something more than anger, and Ichigo could feel it rising within him. "You knew that killing her would force me to harden and grow stronger." It was something more than fury, and Ichigo could feel it beginning to twist his perception and warp his mentality. "You knew it would give me resolve to never let it happen again." Ichigo now knew the word for what he felt. Madness. Aizen watched in fascination as black flames crept swiftly across Ichigo's eyes, from left to right, replacing the whites of his eyes with an inky blackness, and the brown became a hollow amber. He noted with satisfaction that Ichigo's Reiatsu was flaring out quite magnificently. "Indeed, and you have grown quite strong, Kurosaki Ichigo. I find myself interested in seeing your next step in evolution." It started low. A small chuckle, barely audible as Ichigo's body shook, before it grew louder and stronger, until he raised his head again, tears streaming down his face from his hollow eyes as he laughed, his sanity slipping away. His Ijuka's mask slowly materialized and fastened itself to his face as Ichigo continued to laugh and cry simultaneously. The laughter ended abruptly, though, as soon the mask finished appearing. "Strength," Ichigo breathed harshly. "You killed my mother, to make me strong. To make me evolve." Without any warning, He was suddenly in front of Aizen, Black Tensa Zangetsu smothered in the dark power of Getsuga Tenshou as Ichigo swung with all his might. Aizen blocked with some effort. Is this all you have? Pity, I would have thought knowing the truth behind your mother's demise to be a much more powerful motivator. Ichigo fixed a piercing gaze upon his foe. Motivation. You planted the seeds of power in me, now reap what you have sowed. A white Tensa Zangetsu materialized in his hand, thrumming with power and bloodlust as a Getsuga Tenshou ran down this sword as well. Aizen's eyes widened. What? A second Zanpakuto? In Bankai no less. For perhaps the first time in a long while, the perpetually calm trader felt the stirrings of fear creeping up his spine. He leapt back using the speed he'd worked so hard to acquire, narrowly avoiding the swipe of the white weapon. Impressive, Ichigo-kun. Only instinct allowed Aizen to whirl around and block another strike from the hollowified Ichigo. It's sad, Aizen, is that you can't tell the difference between me and a speed clone when I copied the move from your own subordinate, the vizard cackled before using Shunpo again to vanish. He began circling around his enemy at his highest speed, creating several images of himself as he blurred in and out of sight between them, attacking from every angle, every opening he could find. Aizen blocked or evaded every single strike, though it was admittedly quite difficult when he had to block more than one sword coming at him. He was highly impressed at how much of a challenge the boy had become, but there was a reason he felt he was capable to go against Soul Society. He had pushed his skills in every aspect of Shinigami warfare as high as he could. However, when Ichigo suddenly stopped, he was confused. Why didn't you continue your attack? He asked calmly. To everyone's surprise, Ichigo threw his head back and laughed. With the powerful Ijuka's mask on his face changing his voice, it came out as a horrible, soul-chilling laugh, and his unseen allies in the area all shivered violently. After a few seconds, he looked Aizen straight in the eyes. You're so strong, Aizen. Look at us. I'm at my strongest form yet you are keeping up with me. You haven't even used your Shikai's effect on me. Are you scared, then? This only made Ichigo laugh again. Are you kidding? Why on earth would I be scared? I just couldn't help laughing at how hopeless it all seems right now. But I got something that you don't. Aizen was intrigued at the last comment. What's that? The will to do whatever it takes to kill you, even if it means sacrificing everything. Ichigo launched himself at Aizen once more, Black Tensa Zangetsu held in a position for a sweeping strike across his body. My body, my mind, my very soul I will condemn to oblivion as long as you just fucking die. However, Aizen was not the master of Kyoka Suigetsu, the most powerful illusionary Zanpakuto in existence, for nothing. His skill in observing even the tiniest of details was unmatched. Even as he blocked Ichigo's strike, he leapt upwards, narrowly evading the bleached white Tensa Zangetsu coming at him from the side. Undeterred, Ichigo proceeded to change the arc of the swing by pulling sharply up on the chain and sending a burst of Reiatsu down it, forcing Aizen to bring his sword down to block the sudden Getsuga-covered Zanpakuto. The leader of the Arrancar was unable to completely block the next strike, though, as Ichigo Shunpo-ed right behind him with the godlike speed of a hollowified double Bankai. Getsuga. Aizen's eyes widened, but he didn't have time to say anything else as Ichigo brought his blade, wrought in so much power that it appeared more moonfang than sword, down upon him. Tenshou. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like, comment and subscribe, as well as checking out the author on fanfiction.net.